Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Haunted Sleep. This is the place where eerie tales and calming whispers meet, helping you drift into peaceful sleep with a touch of mystery. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying these nightly journeys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a night of chilling calm. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. When I was 7, I saw a spirit at my maternal grandparents' house in southeast Georgia. I had spent the night there, as I often did, and it was time for me to brush my teeth. I went to the hallway bathroom, not closing the door all the way, just leaving it halfway open. After I finished brushing, I checked my teeth in the mirror. That's when I felt like something was coming. I turned my head slightly to the left, and I saw a white gown pass by the door. It had a soft glow to it, but not a bright one. I couldn't see ahead, just the figure disappearing down the hall. I waited, staring at the hallway, hoping it would come back, but it didn't. When I stepped out into the hallway, I looked both ways, but there was nothing. I walked back into the living room where my grandparents were sitting in their recliners, ready for bed and watching TV. I asked my grandma if she'd walked down the hallway. She said no, she had been sitting there the whole time. I told them what I saw, and they didn't seem shocked or even surprised. In fact, my grandma said, "You must have seen your Granny Howard." She said it so casually, like it was normal for glowing figures to walk around the house. Granny Howard was her mother, who had lived with them in her final years. Her room was at the end of that hallway, and my grandma thought that's who I had seen. That house had always been full of strange things. When my grandpa had lung cancer the first time, he had a dream, or maybe it wasn't a dream, where his mother appeared to him and said she had come to take him with her. He told her he wasn't ready, and then she left. Later, my cousin, who now lives there, took a picture in what used to be my grandparents' bedroom. In the picture behind her, there was greenish smoke, and two figures that looked like my grandparents could be seen in it. One day, my brother stayed home from school, refusing to go, and spent the day alone in the house. While sitting in the living room, a pot that was set far back on the kitchen counter suddenly fell to the floor. He was so freaked out he stayed outside until my aunt got home. My aunt and cousins also have a dog that barks at a specific spot in the kitchen, right where my grandfather used to sit at the dining table, which isn't there anymore. The dog refuses to go near it but keeps barking at it. My grandparents weren't fond of animals, especially inside pets, so this behavior seemed strange to us. There have been other odd things too. My aunt and cousins have had the refrigerator door wide open at times, and then it just closes on its own. I remember my grandpa always telling us not to stand in front of the fridge and to shut the door. Another time, while my aunt and cousins were watching TV, it suddenly turned off by itself. They managed to turn it back on, and nothing else had gone off. More recently, my mom had a hysterectomy, and I was sitting next to her in her hospital room. She suddenly pointed to a bird that had landed on the building next to us. The bird seemed to be staring directly at us, and it stayed there for a long time before it flew away. My mom thought it might have been her mother, watching over her. I don't know if spirits can take the form of birds or not, but it felt strange. My dad, who doesn't believe in spirits or anything like that, thought my mom was just being silly. Today, my younger brother came running into the living room, saying he saw a figure in a black suit in the hallway. That freaked me out, especially because I wasn't sure if it was something sinister or not. There are also times when I'm afraid to sleep in my own room. When I walk in, it just feels off. It feels like there's something in there, watching me. I've lived in this house since I was 1, and it was brand new when we moved in, so there's no reason for it to be haunted. But I've only started feeling this way in the last year or so. I've even had sleep paralysis at times, and I know people have different opinions on what causes it, but I can't help wondering if it has something to do with spirits, or something else that's happening while I sleep. Sometimes I'm so scared to sleep in my room that I'll end up sleeping on the couch instead, but even then, I'm afraid of falling asleep, wondering what might happen. My family, both immediate and extended, has always had strange encounters with spirits and ghosts. For the most part, we don't find it too unusual, but we're by no means experts. Recently, though, we started discussing an odd phenomenon that none of us can explain. It started with me. A few years ago, during some very hot nights, I decided to sleep in the kitchen. My mom and younger sister were sleeping in the lounge room, and at the time, my mom had been very sick and was scheduled for a major surgery, a quadruple bypass. I woke up at exactly midnight. I knew the time because I was lying in clear view of the clock. Standing in the doorframe of the lounge room, almost blocking my sight, was a tall figure wearing a trench coat and a hat, like the kind you see in old detective movies. He wasn't facing me but was looking into the lounge room. I don't think he was watching my mom. He stood perfectly still, almost like part of the house. For some reason, I just rolled over and went back to sleep, not feeling afraid at all. The next morning, I told my mom what I saw, but she didn't seem shocked. Instead, she said, "That's interesting." After a brief conversation, she told me that her sister had seen the same spirit walking up her driveway in broad daylight. I realized that, while that story might not seem too significant on its own, it was just the beginning. A few months later, I told my cousin, who I'm very close to, about my experience. I didn't get far before she cut me off with her own story, one that seemed to be about the same spirit. She told me that years ago, during one of our family night parties, the kids played a game of hide and seek. She and another cousin ran off and hid over a fence, facing the road. From their hiding spot, she looked across the road and saw the same figure I described, standing under a street lamp. The only difference was that he was facing her. But just like me, she couldn't see his face. His hat brim covered it. I asked the cousin who had hid with her, and he confirmed the story. He even mentioned that his mother had seen a similar figure when she was younger, though it was inside a house. We kept talking about this, and eventually, we mentioned it to my aunt. She's always been a bit odd about discussing her own experiences, but this time she spoke up. She said that when she and her sister were young, they saw the same figure standing in their bedroom doorway one night. Just like the rest of us, they couldn't see his face. After hearing this, we realized that at least 3 of my aunts and 5 uncles from both sides of the family had seen the same spirit. What's strange is that none of my friends have ever seen anything like this figure. It seems to be something unique to our family. We've never felt threatened by him, and he's never appeared to be malicious or even scary. He doesn't speak, and his face is always hidden by his hat. He just stands there, observing. What's also odd is that everyone who has seen him only sees him once, which makes it even more mysterious. One thing I think is important to note is that we're all Russian, and one of our big family customs is the domovoi, a house spirit that is said to protect a home. Each family is thought to have their own domovoi. However, once you move out and create your own family, you have a different domovoi. This spirit seems somewhat similar to the trench-coated figure, but I don't think they're the same. The domovoi is usually tied to the house, staying indoors, while the trench-coated figure has been seen outside. It's possible that they work together though. Maybe the domovoi keeps watch inside, while the trench-coated figure observes from the outside. We still don't really understand what this spirit is or why it has appeared to so many of us, but we all agree that it's not harmful. If anything, it feels like he's just watching over us, a silent presence in the background of our lives. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In 2006, my dad was 54 when he started feeling really ill. He had trouble breathing, and after months of testing, doctors initially thought it was pneumonia. Eventually, they discovered it was lung cancer, and by the time they found out, it had spread to his brain. They gave him 6 months to live, but it ended up being just 3 months. At the time, I was living in Midland, Michigan, and I was driving home to Roscommon every weekend. I happened to be there the night my dad passed away. Watching someone you love with cancer is heartbreaking, especially when you're helpless, just standing by as they get worse. So, this particular night, after spending a few days up north, I decided we should take a break and visit some friends to get our minds off things. I told my dad goodbye and that I'd see him in the morning, and he replied, "I hope so." I regret leaving him that night, but we went. My boyfriend, now husband, and I went to a bonfire at a friend's house, stayed for a few hours, and I only had one beer. By the time we got back to my parents' house, it was 2 a.m. We were sleeping in the spare room where my parents kept their computer. When we entered, the computer was completely off. As we started changing for bed, the computer turned on by itself. It was flashing crazily on the screen before powering down. This happened 3 times before it finally stayed off. My husband and I exchanged glances and said how strange it was, but we didn't think much more of it and went to sleep. I lay there in the dark, and I could hear my husband's breathing. He was already asleep. I rolled over to face the computer, and that's when I saw it. Standing in front of the computer was a black shadow with the clear outline of a person. I could make out the shape of the head, shoulders, and arms at their sides. I was frozen in fear. I couldn't move my body. I tried reaching over to wake my husband, but I couldn't. I couldn't even call out for help. All I could think of was to pull the covers over my head. Once I did, the next thing I knew, it was 4 a.m., and my younger brother was rushing into the room to tell me that my dad was passing away. My dad had gotten up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and had slipped and fallen, hitting his head. My mother and brother were right there when it happened. The fall must have caused the cancer in his brain to progress quickly. My mom said when she reached him, he couldn't talk or move, only making slight facial expressions. His eyes dilated, and he was gasping for air, unconscious. I rushed to his side and told him it was okay, that he could go, and we would take care of each other. After that, he passed. Later that day, I told everyone about what had happened to me that night. My older sister, 27 at the time, told me something strange had happened to her too. She woke up to find me standing over her bed, yelling her name. She said I kept repeating, "Jenny! Jenny!" until she finally replied, "What?" Then I told her, "It's time." She said right after I said that, my brother burst into her room, flipped on the light, and said, "Jenny, get up, Dad is dying." She said that the moment the light came on, I disappeared. My brother hadn't even come to get me yet. After my dad passed, my mom started feeling something odd every night. She would wake up to someone caressing her arm, and there would be an indentation on the bed, as if someone had been sitting there. This happened every night, so she called me, since I'm the one in the family that always experiences strange things. I told her it was probably Dad, just letting her know that he was okay. I told her to talk to him out loud, as if he were still there, and let him know she understood he was alright and didn't need to stay. After that, she never felt the presence again. In 1990, when I was 17, I was living in a trailer. My parents were divorced, and I spent a lot of time in the room where I could watch TV and do homework. One evening after dinner, I felt something was off but couldn't figure out what. It felt like someone was tapping on my right shoulder, so I looked to my right but only saw the bed and the window, nothing else. I just shrugged it off. Then I heard my mom calling me. When I turned to look at her, I noticed she had been crying. Her face was red. She looked at me and said, "Come in the living room with me." I followed her and saw my uncle sitting across from me. My mom then told me the news. My dad had passed away from a heart attack. I was shocked and angry, especially since he was so young. A year later, in 1991, when I was 18, I was living in my own trailer next to my mom's. One night as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed a dark figure near my window. It was a person-shaped shadow wearing a robe with a hood over its head. I didn't know what to make of it, but it gave me chills. I covered myself up and tried to sleep, But I didn't tell my mom because she didn't believe in things like that. I wasn't sure what I had seen or felt, but it made me uneasy. Then, on September 7, 2004, when I was 30, I had another strange experience. That night, I dreamt that my pawpaw, my mom's father, visited me. He was a strict but very kind man, a devout Christian, and a loving husband and father. The next morning, my mom woke me up, crying. She told me that something had happened to Pawpaw, and I immediately knew he had passed away. I didn't cry right away. I think I was still in shock, but I had the feeling that he had died while I was dreaming about him. We had to go to my mom's hometown for the funeral. Seeing him in the coffin was heartbreaking. It felt like he was just sleeping. He passed away in his sleep that morning, and my mama couldn't wake him up. I guess it was his time to go. Afterward, when we moved into a new house in 2009, I had a strange experience again. I was about to take a nap when I suddenly smelled tobacco smoke. It was familiar, and I realized it was the scent of my pawpaw's tobacco. My family doesn't use tobacco, but he and my uncle did, and he wasn't around anymore. It felt like he was visiting me again, just like my dad had with his smoking smell. Recently, in October, I had another odd experience. My mom, stepdad, and I were heading out to eat. As I was walking out to the car, I saw a man sitting in an old chair that my stepdad had gotten. He looked like my stepuncle, who had passed away. He had white hair and was very thin. I'm not sure why he appeared to me, but it was strange. What do you think? Is it a good or bad thing to see a relative after they've passed away? Later, on Halloween, I was taking pictures during trick-or-treating, and I noticed something strange on my camera, a white streak that looked like a person. My friend thought it could be an angel or a ghost. I'm not sure how to upload the picture to share, but if anyone knows how, I'd appreciate it. My mom also told me a story about my aunt, who lives in an old house in New Orleans. One night, she was about to go to bed when she noticed the shadow of a little boy. He seemed lost and confused, but my aunt wasn't scared. She understood that he just wanted attention. She believes the boy died in that house and has become part of its presence. She's patient and kind with him, and he doesn't scare her. It made me think a lot about spirits and how they interact with people. My mom finally started believing in these things after seeing a picture of Myrtle's plantation. She was hesitant at first, but now we talk openly about our experiences. I'm glad she believes me and isn't afraid anymore. One of our more interesting experiences was at the Myrtle's plantation in May 2009. As a gift for getting out of the hospital, my mom took me there. The place was beautiful and old, but creepy too. When we arrived, I thought I saw a shape, like a person, out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned around, it wasn't there. During the tour, I took pictures of the house. At one point, I noticed a hand in the mirror, and the tour guide pointed out a face in the reflection. That was eerie enough, but things got stranger when I sat down on my walker. Something pulled the footrest, and I jumped up in surprise. My mom asked what was wrong, but I didn't want to tell her because she doesn't believe in ghosts. Later, when I developed the photos, I noticed something even stranger. In one of the pictures, there was a woman who appeared to be a slave. She was sitting in front of the house, and I could see the wrap around her head. My mom, ex-boyfriend, and stepdad all noticed it too. This was my first experience with something like this since the hooded figure. It made me think that maybe spirits are trying to communicate with us, in their own way. In 2004, I was 11 years old, and I had 3 best friends, Ashi, who was 13, Harsha, who was 13, and Trish, who was 12. We were inseparable. Ashi loved perfumes, especially the rose perfume I gave her. Harsha was obsessed with sweets, especially fruit cakes and pastries, and we always found him at the bakery near my house. He smelled like a fresh fruit cake, and everyone joked that he'd end up becoming a baker one day. Those were happy, carefree times. On December 26, 2004, I was out shopping with my dad, preparing for a party at a friend's house. Ashi, Harsha, and Trish were supposed to join us, and I was excited to see them. Suddenly, everything changed. People began rushing around in panic, and then I saw it. The water was coming, fast, like a wave chasing after people. I had no idea what was happening. My dad quickly helped me climb a tree while he stayed below, helping others. I saw Harsha trying to help Ashi climb the tree, but he lost his grip and was swept away by the rushing water. I couldn't help but watch helplessly as Ashi hung onto a branch. A lady, in a desperate attempt to save herself, grabbed Ashi's leg, but her grip slipped, and Ashi was swept away with her. I closed my eyes, not wanting to see any more. When the water finally calmed down, my dad and I made our way home. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and we were lost, unable to find our way. All we saw were crying people, and sometimes, we accidentally stepped over dead bodies. It was a nightmare. My dad was worried about my mom, and I was consumed with wondering what happened to Trish. Thankfully, Trish and my family were safe. It turned out that Trish had been saved by his cousin. As days passed, we tried to reach out to friends and family to find out who survived. Sadly, Harsha and Ashi's families were gone, except for Ashi's younger brother, who was with my family when the tsunami hit. He was only 12 at the time and has been adopted by my parents. The days after the tsunami felt like I was walking through life as a zombie, missing Ashi and Harsha terribly. New Year's Day came, and we didn't celebrate. I lay on the floor, staring at my pink lace socks, which Ashi loved to wear when she visited. It was a painful reminder of her. Then, as I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was standing near the door watching me. I thought it was my mom, but when I looked, there was no one. A few minutes later, I smelled my rose perfume. It hit me hard. I went to check my drawer, and I realized I had given that perfume to Ashi years ago. The smell brought back memories, and I cried, holding my pillow as if Ashi were in my arms. Later that night, Trish came to visit with his family. He seemed even sadder than me. He told me that he had seen Harsha sitting on his bed, staring out the window, and then fading away. I shared my experience with him, and he told me his grandmother had always said that loved ones visit after they pass. We sat together in silence, feeling a strange mix of sadness and comfort. Then I smelled both the rose perfume and the sweet scent of fruit cake. Trish's eyes filled with tears. He said, "They came to see us." And I patted his head. He had seen them, but I could only smell them. Trish's grandmother came to us, crying, and said she was happy to see the 4 of us together again. We cried, hugged her, and I was left feeling both comforted and heartbroken that I couldn't see Ashi and Harsha again. Years passed, and Trish, who is now my boyfriend, never left my side. I still feel the presence of our friends sometimes. When I sleep, I often smell the rose perfume, and it feels like they are still with me. We told our parents about our experiences, and my mom even said she saw Ashi enter my room one night. Now, when I feel filled with joy, I believe it's a sign that they're all okay, that they are with us, and that we shouldn't be sad. Ashi was right. Unexpected things are welcome. And I know, in some way, they'll always be a part of our lives. We've always had a ghost in our house, one we call Casper. He's known for moving things around, pinching people's bums, and causing mischief. I'll share more about him another time, but this story is about something much more personal. It was about my mum. My mum had been very ill for a long time, and I moved back home to care for her. My grandmother was also ill, and since my mum was bedridden, she couldn't help. So I had to take care of both of them. It was the night before my mum's birthday, and I was running up and down the stairs taking care of her. Then my grandmother called and needed me to go to her place right away. As I was walking out, I cursed under my breath in frustration, but right at that moment, the mirror in my mum's room flew off the wall and hit me on the head. I didn't think much of it, just put the mirror back, and went to answer the door. It was some family friends bringing my mum a birthday card. As I turned to greet them, the mirror flew off the wall again and smacked me on the head even harder. I went back upstairs after the guests left, and my mum started talking about the family business, something I was also trying to keep running. I was already stressed, so I snapped at her, telling her I had too much to do right now and that we should talk later. Then, for the third time, the mirror fell off and hit me even harder. That was when I finally shouted, "I've had enough, I can't take this anymore," and stormed off to go check on my grandmother. The next morning, I was at work when I got a call from my mum screaming for help. I was about 20 minutes from the house, so I jumped in my car and sped down the motorway, doing about 120 miles per hour. When I arrived, she was in a terrible state. I knew something was different this time. I called the nurses, and when they saw her, they immediately called an ambulance. She was admitted straight to the hospital, and the family was called in to hear the worst news: my mum was dying. But then, the next day, something strange happened. She was fine. She sat up, waved, and started talking, and the doctors were baffled, asking us what miracle cure we had used. But just a few days later, she took a turn for the worse. We were called in again, and the doctors explained that many people pick up before they die. The following morning, my mum asked my dad a strange question: had she died the night before? She said that my dead grandfather had visited her and told her she had to fight and come back. My grandmother visited her the next day, and as she was leaving, she turned around and saw my mum waving to her in the hospital corridor. This was impossible, as my mum hadn't been able to leave her bed for weeks. That was the last time my grandmother saw her, as she passed away the next day. The night before she died, I received one of those chain texts about love, angels, and good news. The text said if you passed it on at 11:09 a.m., you'd get good news. I didn't take the text seriously, and I simply texted my friend, explaining that my mum was only given a few days. We knew her death was near, but we didn't expect it that quickly. Later, someone was always with her because she didn't want to be alone, so when my uncles and brother left to take care of some things, my dad and I stepped outside for a quick cigarette. As I was talking to a friend who came around the corner, my phone rang. It was my sister-in-law, urgently telling me to get back inside. I ran as fast as I could, grabbed a nurse, and when I reached the door, my mum took her last breath. I knew she had waited for us to leave the room before letting go. The next morning, as we began making funeral arrangements, I needed to calm myself down, so I decided to have a spliff. I hid it in my usual spot, my underwear drawer, and went to the shower. Then I heard someone rummaging through my drawers. Panicking, I thought it was my family, but when I came out of the bathroom, I found my room completely empty, but every drawer and wardrobe door was open, and my stash was lying on the bed. I asked my sister-in-law, and she swore she hadn't been in my room. No one else had been in the house. I think my mum was letting me know she didn't approve of my actions. I had to find my mum's old friend to tell her the news. I went to our old neighborhood, and a man directed me to the post office. The postmaster didn't have her address, but he gave me the town she had moved to. I drove there with my aunt, unsure of where to start. We passed a shop and a pub, and I told my aunt to stop because I was going to ask inside if anyone knew her. When I walked in, I felt awful because there was a funeral wake happening. I nervously asked if anyone knew a Jean Grey, and they said the landlord might. One of the mourners rang the bell, and out came the woman I recognized from my childhood. It was her. She said she usually didn't work that shift, but she was covering for someone. It felt like a sign that my mum had guided me to the right place. A few days later, I was thinking about a text I had received the night before my mum died. I asked my friend to look at the time I had sent the message. She told me it was 11:09 a.m., the same time the text had said you'd get good news. I immediately called the friend who sent it to me, and she had already noticed the coincidence but hadn't wanted to upset me. The days that followed were incredibly difficult. I didn't think I would ever laugh again. My mum had always been glamorous and upbeat, and I couldn't let her go without making her look her best. So, I went to the chapel of rest and did her hair, nails, and makeup before anyone else came to see her. She looked peaceful and beautiful, like she was at peace. When my family came to say their goodbyes, something strange happened. My younger brother and I have never been close, and we still bicker and wind each other up. But when I put my arms around him and said, "These next few days will be the hardest, but as long as we stick together, we'll get through this," the lights in the room started flickering on and off for several minutes. The air in the room changed, and I'll never forget the smell that filled the space. Sometimes I still smell it, and I hope it means my mum is near. My dad, who was outside, was holding my 4-month-old niece. Through his tears, he asked her for a kiss, and to everyone's surprise, she puckered up and kissed him right on the lips. At that age, babies can't understand much, but it felt like she knew exactly what he wanted. We all believed this was my mum sending her last kiss to her husband. My dad passed away in October 2011 at the age of 65. Here's a bit of background on him. Growing up, I had a wonderful childhood. My dad did everything he could to make us happy. He was always giving, and he would have given his last dollar to help someone. He was a great man. When I was about 9, my parents divorced, and my mom, sister, and I moved about an hour away. I was heartbroken. Not only was my family broken, but I couldn't see my dad as often. Despite the distance, we stayed close, though my dad never remarried after the divorce. He was deeply affected by everything that had happened, and he struggled with depression. Around the time I was 12, he was diagnosed with diabetes, which worsened his health. I always tried to take care of my dad. He stayed in the same trailer he bought when he married my mom, but 5 months before he passed, he moved in with my aunt in Florida. She had been trying to get him to live with her for years, but he was stubborn and refused, saying she was bossy. He didn't want to leave us, and as hard as it was to see him go, I knew he'd be better off with someone taking care of him. But his health quickly deteriorated after the move. Around this time, my dad started having memory issues. One night, he was arrested for breaking and entering. Later, the charges were dropped. A little boy had come to his house asking for help getting inside because he was locked out. The strange part was that the boy had to pass 3 other houses to reach my dad's. My dad had never seen the boy before, but he was kind-hearted and would help anyone. He knew the house was empty because the man who lived there owed him money and was in jail. This incident prompted my aunt to take him in for good, saying he was too senile to live alone. Though it was hard to see him go, I felt relief knowing someone would be there for him. I called my dad often, but he didn't remember our previous conversations. He'd call me multiple times a day and repeat the same things. I always acted like we hadn't spoken, not wanting him to feel old, and because I loved talking to him. But he never really told me what was wrong, not wanting me to worry. My aunt, however, did call me one day to tell me that my dad had been diagnosed with lung cancer. It was spreading quickly. The following months were a blur. The cancer was too advanced for chemo to help, and the conversations I had with my dad became fewer. He couldn't remember much, and I visited as often as I could, but it wasn't enough. The last time I saw him was at a hospice facility. He didn't recognize me, which broke my heart because we were so close. But before I left, I asked him to give me that wink, a little thing we always did together. And without hesitation, he winked at me. A week later, he passed away. I wasn't there when he died, and it hurt. Not because he had passed, because I knew he was finally healed, but because I wasn't there when he needed me most. For months, I didn't dream about him. But then, one night, I finally did. In the dream, I was in his house, looking for him. I couldn't find him at first, but then, in front of me, there was this white fog. I knew it was him. His figure appeared, strong and healthy, just like he used to be. He hugged me, and I started crying, calling out for him. I woke up calling his name, crying, "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!" I realized I was dreaming, but then I felt something unusual, a pressure on the back of my upper arm. I was lying on my stomach, and it felt like someone was gently holding my arm. The pressure was strong, but gentle. As I fully woke up, the sensation faded away, leaving me with a sense of peace. It felt like my dad had come to me in my dream to tell me, "It's okay, sweetie," like he always did. I went back to sleep, and when I woke up again, I felt surprisingly at peace. To me, it felt like my dad knew I was having a hard time and came to comfort me. I'll always hold on to that feeling, knowing that, in some way, he's still with me. About 6 years ago, my family moved from Marysville, Washington, to a small town called Stanwood, about 30 minutes away. My dad and stepmom found a bigger house out in the country that would fit everyone. The house itself wasn't too old. We were the second owners, and the previous owners had built it in the 1970s. Nothing strange had ever happened in the house except for the usual creaks and noises that come with an older place. Everything was fine in the house, except for my room. That's where things started happening. When I was little, my mom passed away from leukemia, and her ashes were kept in a gold urn. I have a few faint memories of her, like her smile and how strong she seemed even when she was weak. But I don't remember things like her voice or how she acted. When we moved into the new house, my dad gave me her urn, and I placed it on my drawers. Every night, before I went to bed, I would say goodnight to it. But as I fell asleep, I always got a strange feeling. It was like I was being watched, but not in a comforting way. The first time I experienced something strange happened a few years ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, completely paralyzed from the neck down. I felt the mattress dip next to me, and then I heard a soft whistling noise coming from that direction. I looked over at the clock, and it was 3:33 a.m. As I turned my gaze back, I saw a dark figure leaning over me. I quickly closed my eyes and screamed, but nothing came out. When the figure disappeared, I could finally move again, and I rushed across the hall to my dad's room. I woke him up and told him what happened, but he dismissed it, saying it was just my imagination. I reluctantly agreed, though I wasn't sure if that's what it was. For a while, nothing happened, but I would still wake up at 3:33 a.m. to strange sounds. Knocking, things falling. Then, in late January of this year, I woke up again to that same unsettling feeling. Something was stroking my hair, and I couldn't move. My body was frozen, but my eyes moved around. My TV was on, playing a cooking show, and I could see my mom's urn on the floor, far from where I had left it on my drawer. I was shocked. How had it moved? That thing was heavy, at least 5 or 6 pounds, and I never touched it. The sensation of something cold stroking my cheek continued, and then I heard a woman's voice whisper, "Sure, don't freak out." I looked up as far as I could, and there, standing above me, was a dark figure. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open, and all that came out was a muffled sound. My dad, who was still awake in the living room, heard it and came rushing into my room. As soon as he turned on the light, the shadow vanished, and I was overwhelmed with a sense of dread. I told my dad what happened, but once again, he dismissed it as a nightmare. But how could I have known what was on TV, what time it was, and what was happening in the room if it was just a dream? I knew it wasn't my imagination, especially since it had happened before. A few weeks later, I visited my grandpa, and he showed me a video of my sister and me when we were little. It was the first time I'd heard my mom's voice in years, and I couldn't help but be shocked. It sounded exactly like the voice I had heard in my room, the same whisper. That day, I was watching a ghost documentary where they talked about how demons often take the form of familiar people or things that seem non-threatening. They also mentioned how 3 a.m. is often a time associated with demonic activity. By then, I had started to understand that whatever this was, it was a dark entity. However, I didn't think it was extremely malicious. It had just been unsettling. Since then, I've had several encounters with this shadow. I usually feel a rush of fear, but I've learned to just ignore it and go back to sleep. It doesn't try to hurt me, and it seems to use my mom's voice most of the time, though it changes occasionally. I'm still unsure what it is, but I've come to accept that it's something I'll have to live with for now. When I was little, my great-grandmother, my grandfather's mother, used to scare me. The reason for my fear was that she had spots all over her skin, and as a child, I didn't understand what they were. Every time my mother would take me to visit her, I would cover my eyes until we left. Even now, when I look at her pictures, I still feel uncomfortable. Most people in my family say she was a good person, but others say she had a darker side. I can't say for sure what she was like when she was alive, but after everything that happened, I think she might have been bad. Here's why. When we moved to an apartment in Tampa, things seemed fine at first. The first couple of months were uneventful. I wasn't seeing or hearing things, and I felt at peace. But then, one day, something changed. I started feeling down for no reason. I'd cry without knowing why, and my head would spin, making me dizzy. I told my grandmother about how I was feeling, and she suggested I take a nap to see if I'd feel better when I woke up. Half an hour into my nap, I heard someone calling my name. I thought it was my grandmother, so I woke up and turned around to check, but no one was there. I got out of bed and went to the living room, asking my grandmother what was wrong. She told me she hadn't called me at all. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just a dream. But when I woke up the next morning, I noticed bruises on my lower leg. They didn't hurt, but I had no idea how they got there, so I decided not to tell anyone. That morning, I felt a little better, but my head was still spinning. I went out to the pool, and when I came back to my room, I found all my clothes and bedsheets thrown on the floor. I called my brother, thinking it was him playing a prank, but he was still at school. At that point, I started feeling uneasy. I cleaned up the mess and stayed in my room, trying to ignore the strange feeling. I lay in bed, listening to music on my iPod, and eventually fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the smell of burnt candles. I looked around, but none of my candles were lit. When I opened my door, a cold breeze hit me, even though the AC was off. I started to feel a bit panicked and looked around the house for the source of the smell, but there was nothing. Suddenly, I heard the door to my room slam shut. Everyone else in the house was asleep, so I knew it wasn't anyone else. I ran back to my room, shut the door, and looked around, but there was no one there. I crawled under the covers, trying to calm down. That's when I heard what sounded like multiple people talking in my room, all at once. I don't remember much after that, but when I woke up the next morning, I had a terrible headache. My grandmother always used to say, "In the light you cannot see the dark, but in the dark you can see the light." I took her words to heart, and decided to sleep with the light on that night. I didn't wake up until the next morning, and I felt better. But again, when I woke up, I had more bruises, this time on my upper legs. That night, I sprinkled holy water on my bed, my room, and even on myself, hoping it would give me peace. For a while I felt better, but then things took a darker turn. My bed started shaking, and I heard the same voice calling my name again. I sat up, looking around, and suddenly saw a hand reach out from the bottom of my bed. I screamed, but no one heard me. I quickly lay back down, covered myself with the blankets, and began to pray. That's when I saw her, my great-grandmother. She was squeezing my arms and saying, "You're next. You and your grandmother will pay." She laughed, squeezing my arms harder. As this happened, the room filled with dark blue light, almost like fog, and shadows darted across the room. I don't remember much after that, but I woke up the next afternoon, terrified. My arms were covered in bruises, and I had no idea how to explain to my grandmother what had happened. From that point on, I couldn't sleep in my room without keeping a rosary on my bed and a Bible next to me. The presence still lingers, and while I don't experience anything as intense anymore, I still don't feel comfortable sleeping alone in my room. This was the only time my great-grandmother appeared to me, and I still don't understand why it happened. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal since I was a little kid. I used to ask my father to take me inside old, abandoned houses I would find around our neighborhood, hoping to see a ghost. My dad, being a good sport, would always take me into these places if they were accessible. I think deep down, he enjoyed exploring them too, though who really knows for sure. I was about 5 years old when we started doing this, and I'm not really sure why I was so drawn to the paranormal at such a young age. I had no real concept of what it was, but I suppose I was just a strange kid. As I got older, my interest in ghosts and everything paranormal only grew. The difference, however, is that as a child I didn't fear it, though I might not have fully understood what I was searching for. Now, as an adult, I'm terrified by it, but I still find myself utterly fascinated, if that makes sense. I apologize for the backstory, but I wanted to give you a glimpse into my mindset. Being so interested in the paranormal, I started asking my family members for their own stories. I wasn't looking for the typical campfire tales, but real, personal accounts. My dad didn't care much about ghosts, so I didn't get much from him. But my mother, surprisingly, opened up to me and shared some incredible experiences she'd had over the years. I was stunned that she shared the same fascination with the paranormal as I did, and in a way, it brought us closer. Now, on to the main story. This happened around 2007 or 2008, when I had moved from Gonzales, Louisiana, to Boise, Idaho, after Hurricane Katrina. By profession, I'm a meat cutter, with over 20 years of experience. When I moved to Boise, I continued working in my trade, but eventually, after a year or two, I was laid off and had to find another job. Job hunting in my field was tough, but I was fortunate in that I wasn't struggling financially. My home and car were paid off, so I only really needed enough to cover food and a few small bills. One day, while driving, I saw a "Help Wanted" sign outside a care facility for seniors with Alzheimer's, so I decided to go in and apply. I thought it might be fulfilling to help people, and who knows, maybe I would hear a few ghost stories along the way. To my surprise, I got the job. I was hired to work the night shift, from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. I had to take a few certification courses, med certification, CPR, etc., which I did and passed. The facility was pretty eerie, though. I would be the only person working there from 10 p.m. until morning. Let me give you a quick layout of the building. When you walked through the front door, there was a hallway directly ahead. To the right was a living room, and to the left, the kitchen and dining room. There was another hallway between the kitchen and dining room, and then to the right, another long hallway. All the floors were hardwood, so every step anyone took echoed throughout the building. I never asked anyone there about ghosts or paranormal experiences. I didn't think it was appropriate to bring it up in a place where people were spending their final days. So I just did my job, cleaning, preparing meals for the next day, checking on residents, and administering medications. The place was always a little spooky. Sometimes the residents would surprise me by poking their heads out of their doors when I wasn't expecting them. And there were occasional weird noises, things falling, things shifting, nothing overtly scary, just enough to make me jump. I worked there for about a year, and apart from the occasional scare, I didn't have any real ghostly experiences. The residents, even with dementia, were amazing people. I grew very fond of them, and many of them were still sharp in their minds despite their condition. A few times during my time there, I came into work and was told that one of the residents had passed away during the day. This always made the night shift a little harder, as I had to remind myself they were no longer there when I went to check on their rooms. A few new residents would come in from time to time, and they were always admitted during the daytime while I was off. So when I came on for my shift at night, the person going off shift would tell me about the new resident, any special needs, and what medications they required. One night, everything seemed normal, but at around 2 a.m., I was in the kitchen preparing for the next day when I saw a sweet little old lady standing right in front of me. I didn't know who she was, as no one had mentioned a new resident. I was concerned that I wasn't informed about her needs or medication schedule, especially since many of the residents had specific needs. But before I could ask, in the blink of an eye, she vanished. I'd just seen my first ghost. I wasn't scared, surprisingly. It was more of a shock, but not fear. I never mentioned it to anyone at work, thinking that maybe the lady had died before I started working there. Perhaps a lingering spirit. It wasn't until a few days later, when I saw a photo on the wall of past and present residents, that I realized the lady I saw was not one of them. I asked my boss about the photos, and he confirmed they were of everyone who had ever stayed there. But the lady I saw was not in any of them. A year later, I visited my mom, and we ended up talking about ghosts. I decided to tell her about my experience, describing the woman I'd seen. My mother smiled and asked me to come to her room. When I got there, she showed me some old family photos, and there she was, the same woman I had seen at the care facility. She was my mother's great-grandmother. My mom told me that her great-grandmother had shown herself to other family members too, but she never stayed long, just popping in for a brief visit. My mother explained that, in all the years she had known her great-grandmother, she had always been kind and sweet, but she didn't know why she had appeared to me. But it comforted me to know that when we die, it isn't the end. Whatever the reason for her visit, it was clear that she wasn't gone. She was still watching over us. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This story begins in July and August of 2012. My grandpa had been admitted to the hospital several times. Initially, he went to Capitol Hospital for a procedure where a nasogastric tube, NGT, was placed through his nose to help him eat since he wasn't eating on his own. But after 2 weeks, he kept removing it, 7 times in total. My aunt, who had come from Australia, decided that a PG operation would be better. So, Grandpa was admitted again, this time at Fatima Hospital. The operation was successful, and we even celebrated his 80th birthday in his hospital room on July 18th. A week or so after we returned home, Grandpa developed a high fever and diarrhea, so we had to admit him back into the hospital. My aunt and brother had to return to Australia, and from that point on, I was the one who stayed with him at the hospital 24/7. There was one particular night when he didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, observing him. At one point, he raised his right hand and said, "You're too high," then waved goodbye. He smiled as he looked around at nothing. I asked him, "Tay, who are you talking to?" He just stared at me, and then looked past me, as if he were looking at something behind my back. I looked at his eyes, and he smiled again. But there was no one else in the room, just him and me. I even took a video of him for about 10 minutes, but as soon as I started recording, he stopped talking and raised his hand. When the nurse came in to feed him, I stopped recording to charge my phone. After the nurse left, Grandpa started talking again and raising his hand. I felt sure then that he was seeing something. I held his hand and said, "Tay, please stay here, don't go yet." Then I fell asleep, and when I woke up the next morning, he was still wide awake. After 6 days, we brought Grandpa home again. He was on special food prescribed by the doctor, and we gave him his medications. On the morning of August 11th, I woke up and went straight to his bed, which was downstairs near the living room. I massaged his right hand and exercised his arm. He held my hand so tightly, and I told him I was going to have coffee and would return soon. But that day, images of him being dead kept flashing in my mind, and I didn't know why. I started crying without any real reason. After lunch, I emailed my relatives in Los Angeles, Canada, and Australia, telling them everything that had happened with Grandpa in the hospital. I ended the email by saying, "Let's all be prepared for whatever might happen." That night, I couldn't sleep and only managed to fall asleep at 4:30 a.m. On August 12th, at 6:30 a.m., my youngest sister knocked loudly on my door and said, "Grandpa's gone." She called my brother and mom, and we rushed to his bed. Dad was already beside him and said, "Your grandpa left you now." I checked his pulse, eyes, and heartbeat, nothing. I told Dad to rush him to the hospital, hoping for a miracle, but when we arrived, the doctor pronounced him dead. I called the rest of the family, and that morning we began processing the funeral. I stayed at the funeral for a few days, waiting for my aunt from Australia to arrive before Grandpa was buried next to my grandma at the cemetery. The night of the burial, when we came home, I opened my door and smelled Grandpa's scent for just a few seconds. I knew it was him. Then, a few nights later, while I was on my computer, I heard my daughter screaming. She was in my mom's room, standing and hysterically crying. I asked her what happened, and she said the door wouldn't open. She had locked it, but never had trouble opening it before. I told her to go downstairs to play, and as I thought about it, I figured maybe Grandpa was playing with her, since he always liked kids and she was his first great-granddaughter. Some nights, I'd wake up around 3 a.m. for no reason. Then, on August 24th, something strange happened. My siblings and I were in our respective rooms. Mom and my aunt went out, and Dad was at the store. One of our employees, who was welcome to come inside the house, came in for dinner. While he was eating, he saw something in the reflection of our 42-inch flat-screen TV. Someone was sitting in the chair in front of the TV, the very spot where Grandpa used to sit. The employee peered around the corner, and there was Grandpa, sitting and smiling. The employee blinked, but Grandpa was still there. He said he blinked again, and Grandpa was still sitting there. Then my sister walked in through the front door, and the figure disappeared. We all knew that Grandpa was now at peace, alongside Grandma. Even though I feel comforted, I still can't stop myself from crying when I think of both of them. I miss them, and I love them dearly. One evening in July 2012, my dad picked me up from Capitol Hospital. My aunt had suggested I go home to rest since Grandpa would be discharged the next day. We were riding the motorcycle down G. Araneta Avenue around 8 p.m. when the traffic light turned yellow. My dad sped up to make it through before it changed. To my horror, we were bumped by two other motorcycles. One came from behind, and the other was making a U-turn. I saw a woman fly into the street from the collision, and the other motorcycle tumbled. My dad managed to keep us from falling onto the street. We went to the side of the road, and Dad spoke to the other drivers. I noticed they all had bruises on their legs, feet, and arms, including Dad on his left foot. But me? I had no bruises, not even a single scratch. It was a miracle, and I thank God that no one was seriously hurt, and that the accident wasn't worse. Back at home, while Grandpa was still with us, my mom placed a radio near him. Often, we would see him raising his hand as if reaching for something. One afternoon, my mom and daughter were in the living room, reviewing for an exam. They were the only ones in the house at that time. Suddenly, the radio turned off on its own. My 5-year-old daughter looked up and asked, "Mama, who turned off the radio?" She calls my mom Mama, and me Mommy. My mom replied, "I don't know, maybe Nene, Grandmom." Just as she said that, the radio turned back on by itself. A strange incident also occurred with my aunt who lives in Quezon City. The last typhoon had brought heavy rains, flooding their house all the way to the second floor. Their cars were full of water. When the floodwaters receded, they began cleaning and repairing their vehicles. To my aunt's surprise, the documents she had in her car, important papers about the family properties, including homes, apartments, and business records, were completely dry. Only one folder was dry, and it contained the property documents. It was the folder she had been taking care of for the family's legal matters. This was an incredible sight, especially considering the flood had destroyed so much, but somehow, these documents remained untouched. The night before Grandpa passed away, I was invited to a friend's birthday dinner. I came home late and checked on Grandpa. He was still awake and had a fever, so I put a damp cloth on his forehead. I told my dad about it, and he assured me that he had already given Grandpa his medicine. I went upstairs, but when I unlocked my door, I found my bathroom toiletries scattered all over the floor. The items had been carefully arranged on top of my Orokin drawer, and I knew there was no reason for them to fall. It was strange and unsettling. A similar thing had happened before when I was browsing the internet in my room, and items just fell for no reason. That night, I couldn't sleep and finally drifted off around 4:30 a.m. Around 5 a.m., my mom woke up because she smelled the powder that my aunt from Australia had given her. She wondered how she was smelling it since she had placed it in her cabinet and hadn't used it. She immediately thought of my grandmom, as that particular scent was her favorite. She got up and went downstairs around 5:30 a.m. to check on Grandpa. While she was nebulizing him to help with his cough and phlegm, she noticed that Grandpa started crying. She spoke to him, saying, "Tay, I'll go to the market later to buy fruits and vegetables for you. Wait for me, okay?" Grandpa nodded in response. My sister came downstairs to use her laptop, and a few minutes later, she noticed Grandpa had stopped breathing. She screamed, ran to call my dad, and rushed upstairs to wake us all up. That moment marked the end of Grandpa's time with us, and the beginning of our deep loss. This portion connects to the previous story about my grandpa's passing. Since then, there have been times when I feel his presence, especially when I feel alone or sad. I sense that he and my grandma are still with me, providing a sense of peace and security, even when I'm outside the house. It brings me comfort to know that they are together now, for eternity, after all they went through, and that their bond didn't end with death. Even though the loss is still painful, I find solace in the thought that they are at peace, together again. In 1987, my family and I went on holiday to Spain. I wasn't the only teenager in the group, and for the first few days, everything was carefree. My sister and I spent our time enjoying the sea, making new friends, and laughing, like any typical teenagers. But one afternoon, something changed. I was sitting on the bed in our hotel room, feeling an unfamiliar sense of sickness and dread. It wasn't like the usual upset stomach from trying new foods. This felt different. A sense of unease washed over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. I tried to think back to the last few days before the trip, wondering if I had argued with a friend or left things unresolved, but my mind was blank. I spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of it, but the feeling didn't go away. When my sister and our friend invited me to join them for a swim, I declined. I sat on the bed, trying to figure out what was causing the strange feeling. The next day, it passed, and I went back to enjoying the holiday. But I couldn't stop wondering why I had felt this way. A week later, our holiday ended, and we returned home in the early hours of the morning. The only thing on my mind was sleep. We had recently extended our house, and I was excited to sleep in my new bedroom. It wasn't a typical teenage room. I kept it neat and loved rearranging the furniture. That night, my bed was positioned against the longest wall in the room. When I lay down to sleep, I heard a strange sound, heavy breathing, gradually getting louder. At first I dismissed it, thinking it was just the exhaustion from the trip. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. But the breathing didn't stop. It grew louder and more persistent. I became convinced that someone had broken into our house and was hiding in my wardrobe. Terrified, I ran to my parents' room and woke my dad. He quickly came to check my room, though his face told me that he hadn't found a burglar. Still, I asked him to check more thoroughly. We went back into my room, and he opened the wardrobe, moving my clothes aside. "Check under the bed," I insisted, but he said he already had. He seemed annoyed at being woken up, but I couldn't shake the fear I felt. I tried to go back to sleep, but the heavy breathing came back, louder than before. This time, I didn't ask my dad for help. I lay there, terrified, as the sound seemed to come from right next to my bed. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. The next morning, as we unpacked our bags, I told my parents about the strange breathing. They assured me there was no one in the house, and in the daylight, it didn't seem nearly as frightening. Then, later that day, there was a knock at the door. My parents answered, and I was busy sorting through the gifts I had bought. When they sat me and my sister down, they told us some sad news. An old neighbor had come by, someone we hadn't seen in a while. Their daughter, who had been a childhood friend of mine, had passed away from an asthma attack while we were on holiday. She was just 15 years old. Her father had tried to contact us, but he had been told we were away. The shock of hearing this news was overwhelming, but what stood out to me the most was the timing. She had died at exactly the same time I had been feeling that strange sickness in Spain. I began to wonder if somehow she had connected with me during her passing, even though we were in different countries. The breathing sounds in my room suddenly made sense. Could that have been her, struggling to breathe? Maybe she was trying to reach out to me, knowing I could somehow sense her, even from afar. I found comfort in the thought that she might have chosen me to visit, but at the time, I was too scared to speak to her. After that night, I never heard the breathing sound again. But I moved my bed from the wall. I couldn't explain why, but something about it didn't feel right anymore. Looking back, I wish I had known it was her. I wouldn't have been so afraid and would have spoken to her one last time. In 1994, I found myself in a whirlwind romance, which led to the conception of my daughter. Like many whirlwind relationships, reality hit hard, and we quickly discovered we weren't as compatible as we initially thought. Our relationship ended on bad terms, and I was left alone to raise our daughter. The only contact we had after that was the monthly child support payments, a fight I had to battle for years. He moved on with a new partner, and I was left to navigate life with my daughter, which wasn't easy, but I did it. I gave birth to my middle daughter on Mother's Day, but both of us were very unwell at the time. It was a tough start, but I moved on from the bad relationship and focused on my children. Over the years, life moved on, and I never gave my ex a second thought. By 2008, I had managed to secure 2 jobs, one temporary, and the other a permanent, well-paid administration position. I was proud of what I had accomplished on my own. I had my house, my car, and was financially more secure than ever before. I decided to celebrate. Life hadn't been easy. There had been losses and struggles, including the sudden death of my boyfriend and my middle daughter being diagnosed with a serious illness. My mum, who had been my rock through all of it, was living with me after my parents' divorce. Despite her own battle with breast cancer, she's thankfully in remission now. She had always been there for me and my children, helping with the house and taking care of us while I worked hard to provide for the family. To celebrate my new career, I decided to have a small party with just my mum. We listened to some classic tunes and enjoyed a drink or two. I'm mostly teetotal, but I thought one drink wouldn't hurt. Well, the next morning proved me wrong. I woke up feeling sick, weak, and exhausted. Worse still, I had to drive to a community center to pick up some items I had promised to deliver for a tidy sum. I didn't want to lose the money, so despite how I felt, I made myself go. My nephew came with me, and when we arrived, the manager of the community center looked at me in horror. He offered me a glass of water and advised me to go home, but I refused. The next day, I felt a little better, but that wasn't the end of it. I had no idea that my ex's parents had been at the hospital for the past few days. My ex had suffered a brain hemorrhage, and after being declared brain dead, life support was turned off. He was only 43. My daughter and I were devastated. She was about to turn 13, and she had never had a real relationship with him, as his girlfriend had kept him away from her and his other daughter. In the following days, his family went out of their way to comfort my daughter. They spent a lot of time at our house, offering support during such a hard time. But one Sunday morning, when my 2 eldest daughters and I were at home alone, something strange happened. My eldest daughter, who wasn't his child, was in the kitchen talking about my ex's father when a potato was thrown at her. She didn't mention it at first, but later, when I was in the kitchen myself, a fridge magnet was thrown at me. It startled me, and when I looked around, everyone was sitting down in the lounge. That's when my eldest revealed what had happened earlier. We were both confused. At first, we thought it was some sort of trick being played on us. But after we both experienced objects being thrown in our direction, we couldn't deny that something strange had occurred. Later, I discovered that my ex had died at the exact same time I had felt that strange, sickly feeling in Spain. This had also happened when a close friend of mine passed away. I couldn't help but wonder if my ex was somehow reaching out to me. Maybe he was trying to apologize for the hurt he had caused us. Though we hadn't parted on good terms, I've forgiven him. And in my heart, I hope he can forgive me too for contributing to the failure of our relationship. We've been living in this house for 7 years now, and from day one, I've been aware of the presence of two entities here. They're not malevolent. In fact, one of them seems to be entirely focused on my mother. Let me explain. My mom had a tough childhood. She grew up in foster homes and boarding schools after her mother passed away when she was just 6. Her father disappeared shortly after her mother's death, though she later reunited with him. But he doesn't play much of a role in this story. From a very young age, my mom always told my sister and me that she felt her mother was still watching over her. Even to this day, she wakes up in the middle of the night and sees her mother standing beside her bed, looking down at her. She says her mother is always calm and that she feels protected when her mom is near. As strange as this might sound, knowing that my grandmother's spirit has been with my mom her entire life is oddly comforting. And it seems she's one of the entities in our house, as my mom currently lives with me. Living in a house with spirits, you learn certain things quickly. For example, there's one big rule: you never watch movies like The Ring, The Grudge, or Paranormal Activity here. These kinds of films have a way of making things happen. One night, we made the mistake of trying to watch The Ring. The moment the movie started, the alarm system in the house went off, loudly. Now, most people would chalk that up to coincidence. But here's the catch. By then, we'd lived here for about 6 months, and my parents had disconnected the alarm system. They had big dogs outside and didn't feel the alarm was necessary, so it was completely disconnected. But that night, as the movie started, my mom needed something from her room, and as she walked past the alarm panel, it suddenly powered up and flashed the danger light. She was freaked out, ran into the living room, and the alarm went off with a loud siren. We immediately turned the TV off, and the alarm went silent. The panel stopped flashing. We checked the backup power supply for the alarm system and found that it was completely disconnected. It had never happened before, and it never happened again. Needless to say, we haven't tried to watch any horror films in the house since. Over the years, I've always felt that one presence is female and one is male. Until recently, I thought the male presence was a close friend of mine who had passed away during our first year in the house. But a friend of mine and her husband came to visit one night, and her husband said something that caught me off guard. He told me that the male presence wasn't my friend at all, but rather a little boy, around 4 or 5 years old. He was calm and didn't seem to have any negative energy, but the thought of a child spirit in my house bothered me. That explanation made sense when I thought about the swing set we had in the house for my boys. One of them was very sick at the time, and we couldn't risk him getting sicker by playing outside, so we kept the swing set indoors. There were times when the swing would move by itself, and one day, while the twins were napping, I sat and watched the swing slowly move back and forth. I asked aloud, "Do you think it's fair that you're playing while the twins are sleeping?" The swing slowly came to a stop. It seemed like the child's spirit heard me. Little kids who come into our house tend to pick up on this little boy. They smile and stare at nothing, often asking if he wants to play with them. My boys have done the same thing. This little spirit has a habit of running around the house, starting at the door from the kitchen to the lounge, through the dining room, and back to the kitchen door. Sometimes, he'll tap a countertop to get attention or give you a little surprise. When my friend's husband told me about the little boy, he also mentioned the female presence. He said she didn't give off any threatening energy, but there was something about the way she died that felt negative. He seemed sure she had died violently, and when I confirmed that she had been murdered, he jumped out of his chair, visibly shaken. He asked me not to tell him any more details. I'm not sure why these spirits have attached themselves to our house or why they linger. But I do know that while they don't seem to wish harm, their presence is certainly felt. And though I'm not sure how to fully interpret it, I believe the little boy is somehow connected to the house, while the female spirit's connection to my mother runs deeper, almost like a guardian who never truly left. My mother's father died when she was just a little girl. He was found dead in the snow, and they said it was either because he jumped or was pushed from the building he was at. He was an alcoholic, which might explain why he was only wearing pants when they found him. He was also severely depressed, and depression runs in my mom's side of the family. I've struggled with depression since I was around 8 or 9 years old, and I've always felt very lonely, until I moved into the guest room. I've lived in that house since I was 1. It's big and old, with 3 bedrooms upstairs. For a long time, I stayed in one of those rooms, but when I turned 11, I decided I wanted the sky blue room next to mine. I moved everything into it and loved it. One night, I had my friend Alexis sleep over. We weren't allowed to close the door, so she eventually fell asleep out of boredom. I was sitting on the bed reading a book when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the door move. It was slowly shutting. At first, I thought it was just going to stop, but I watched it continue, inch by inch, until it was fully shut. My heart raced in fear, and I woke Alexis up to tell her what happened. We stayed up for about 10 more minutes, talking, but eventually fell asleep. In the morning, we woke up to find my brother had drawn mustaches on our faces. When I asked him why, he said, "Because you're not allowed to lock the door." About a year later, I was up late in the living room watching TV when my mom told me it was time for bed. I turned off the TV, went around the kitchen and dining room to turn off all the lights, and started heading up the stairs. But as I was halfway up, I heard the TV turn back on. I quickly ran back down, saw that it was on again, and turned it off once more. I was confused, but I went to bed, not really sure how that happened. Later that year, or maybe it was the next, something else happened. I was so tired one night, I got into bed and turned off the lights. I was half asleep when I heard papers on my dresser fall to the floor and start moving around. I turned on the light, saw the papers on the floor, and figured the fan must have blown them down. I picked them up, thought it was solved, and tried to go back to sleep. But then, I felt something move my hair. I turned my head to the other side, thinking it was the fan again. But then I heard what sounded like someone's mouth opening right next to my ear. I was terrified. I lay still in the dark, trying to figure out what was going on. Finally, I worked up the courage to turn the light on and leave the room. I ran downstairs to my mom, crying, and told her there was someone in my room. She sent my dad upstairs to check, but no one was there. I felt silly, like I had overreacted, so I let them go back to sleep. I stayed in the living room with the lights on, trying to calm down. As I lay there, I felt a strange sense of reassurance, like I wasn't alone. I remember thinking, it's just my mother's father. I didn't fully understand why I felt that way, but I didn't feel scared anymore. It was like he was there, watching over me. Before November of 2014, I never truly understood what it felt like to lose someone who meant the world to me. My grandpa passed away a couple of days before Thanksgiving, but he had been sick for over a year. To this day, it still doesn't feel real. Sometimes I feel like I could walk into his house and find him sitting there, watching his favorite baseball team on TV. My grandpa wasn't a religious man. In fact, he had a strong resentment toward priests. Whenever they tried to visit him in the hospital to offer prayers, he'd kick them out. I never fully understood why, but I'm not religious either, so I actually found it kind of funny to see him stand his ground like that. I can say, without a doubt, that I was my grandpa's favorite out of his 7 grandchildren. It wasn't a bad thing though. I think everyone knew it, and it didn't cause any tension in the family. November 17th, 2014, was the last day my grandpa was conscious. The following days were agonizing to witness, as he slowly slipped away. Coming from a Catholic family, we spent those days saying the rosary and praying together. But as the house filled with family and neighbors, I started stepping out as soon as the prayers began. I wasn't uncomfortable with the prayers or church, but there was something about being in that room that felt wrong. I just knew this wasn't what my grandpa would have wanted. My family scolded me for not being there for him, but deep down, I felt I was respecting his wishes. The day before my grandpa passed, the whole family was kneeling in prayer around his bed, including the priest. His bed was positioned directly in front of a corner stand that displayed pictures of all of us, pictures from my cousin's quinceañeras and graduations, including a photo of me on the bottom shelf. Nobody was near the stand, and no one had moved anything since everyone was quietly praying. My aunt was about 3 feet away from it when she suddenly heard something fall to the ground. When she turned around, she saw a picture frame about a foot away from the stand, with my picture lying face up behind her. No other picture frames had fallen or moved before this, so I took it as a sign from my grandpa when my aunt came outside to tell me. Then, on November 22, 2014, my grandpa passed away. His body was already cold, and his heart had stopped, just minutes before midnight. The oxygen tank in the living room stopped working at the same time his heart did. We had a candle lit in the room, and right at that moment, the candle made a loud popping noise and flared up in flames. It took a minute to put it out before it could spread to anything else. The day after his passing, my 4-year-old cousin, who is autistic, came in and asked where her grandpa was. We told her he was in the hospital, not knowing how to explain it to her. As she was walking away, she muttered, "Tada cold." Tada is the Spanish term for grandpa. To this day, every time she talks about my grandpa, she says he's cold. I'm not sure what to make of all these experiences, but there's one dream I had of my grandpa that brought me a bit of peace. In the dream, he was wearing his raincoat, and he smiled down at me while I lay in bed. As he smiled, he reached down to touch my arm, and it was at that moment that I woke up. Even after waking, I still felt like someone was touching me. As a side note, my grandpa's birthday was on October 17th. We had given him a birthday card that day, and he wrote, November 17th, on the front cover, his last day of being conscious. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My great-great-aunt Ruth was my absolute favorite person in the entire world. I adored her, and she adored me in return. From the moment I was born in 1991, she was already in her 80s, but that never stopped us from spending countless hours together. I spent much of my childhood at her house, playing and talking with her. She was so sweet, and even though I probably wasn't the sweetest child, she loved me unconditionally. Growing up, I was always told by Aunt Ruth and other family members that she was old and that I would eventually need to prepare myself for her passing. She lived a long life, reaching 99 years old. I was 21 when she passed away. The day she died, I felt an overwhelming urge to leave work early and go visit her in the hospital. She had fallen a few days before, and I knew she was in poor health. When I arrived, she was napping. A nurse came in and woke her up, but she didn't realize I was there at first. I sat down beside her and told her I was there. Her eyesight was mostly gone by then, so she couldn't see me. She asked if she was at home, and I told her no, she was in the hospital. She then told me she was ready to die. Every other time she had said this, I would cry, not ready to let her go. But this time was different. I saw how fragile she was, barely 98 pounds, and I told her if she was ready, it was okay for her to go. A few hours later, her condition worsened. By the time I returned to the hospital, she was already incoherent. I walked to her bedside, took her hand, and said, "I love you." She looked me in the eye and, clear as day, said, "I love you too." She passed away a few hours later, when I was at home in bed. My mom called me, crying uncontrollably, to tell me that she had just passed. Oddly, I felt a strange sense of relief. I did cry, but it wasn't the overwhelming grief I expected. I felt calm, almost peaceful, and I believe that was my Aunt Ruth's way of helping me through it. She knew I would struggle, and I think she surrounded me with her warmth and love, guiding me to find peace. Before she passed, Aunt Ruth had shared with me some recurring dreams she had. In these dreams, her late husband Rudy and her sister, whom I never met, would visit her. They would come to the front door of her house, and she would let them in. She would unpack their suitcases, filled with clothing she remembered them wearing, but they never spoke. Then, they would repack their suitcases and leave. As they left, they would always say, "Come with me, Ruth," but she refused every time, not yet ready to pass herself. She knew they weren't alive, but it was clear to me that they were waiting for her. My maternal grandmother also told me a story Ruth had shared with her after Rudy passed away. Ruth said that one night, she saw Rudy's silhouette in her doorway. She spoke to him, telling him it was time for him to pass on, and that she would be okay. I believe Aunt Ruth told me about these dreams to prepare me for what was to come after she left. A few weeks after her passing, I had a dream about her. In the dream, I was at the house she had lived in my whole life. I knocked on the door, and when she answered, she wasn't the frail, elderly woman I remembered. She was young, vibrant, with some color in her hair, and wearing a stylish 70s pantsuit. She looked amazing, healthy, and full of life. She told me that she was okay and would always be with me. Since then, I've had more dreams about her. In one of them, she even brought my paternal grandmother with her. These dreams have brought me great comfort since her passing. I miss her deeply, but I feel her presence all around me. I know she's still watching over me, just like she always did. I was pregnant with my first child, and my former husband and I had just discovered that we were having a girl. We agreed on the name Abigail Rose. I chose the name Abigail because it meant a father's pride and joy. A few nights later, I had a vivid dream. I was in a large white room with an old-fashioned bassinet in the center. I approached the bassinet and saw a baby girl inside. She had dark brown eyes and fine hair, wrapped in a pink blanket with white stars and moons on it, just like the one I had picked out. I knew instantly that she was mine. As I reached out to touch her tiny hand, a single white feather floated down from nowhere and landed on her. At that moment, the bassinet filled with blood, and the baby was gone. All I heard was a voice saying, "She is safer with me." I woke up with tears streaming down my face, feeling an overwhelming sense that something was wrong with my baby. I woke my now ex-husband and told him about the dream and my uneasy feeling, but he brushed it off, blaming it on my hormones, and told me to go back to sleep. 3 nights later, I went to a revival and stayed afterward to help clean up after the church dinner, which kept me out later than I had originally told him I would be. When I knocked on the door to our trailer, I was greeted by a drunk and enraged husband who refused to believe that I had been at the revival. He accused me of being with another man, even though I had never cheated on him. He had, however, been cheated on in the past by other women. The situation escalated quickly, and things turned physical. He pushed me, causing me to hit the side of our wood heater. When I stood up, I noticed that I was bleeding. After calling a friend to take me to the hospital, I was devastated to learn that I had lost the baby. A year passed, and the sorrow that had consumed me slowly turned into a rage so blinding that it was hard for me to function. The world around me felt like a vacant blur. Then, October 14th, 2010, arrived, the day that would have been Abigail's due date. I dragged myself out of bed, went to the nearest store, and bought a single pink balloon. I went to the park, released the balloon in her memory, and then went back home. That night, I lay in bed, holding the blanket that I had planned to bring Abigail home in. I broke down. Anger and heartbreak flooded through me, and I screamed at God, asking why He would give me such a precious gift only to take it away. I remember saying, what I wouldn't give to hold her, to hear her voice. Eventually, I exhausted myself and fell asleep, but I was awoken by something I'll never forget. It felt like a tiny hand gently touching the side of my face, followed by a soft voice, a little girl's voice, that said, "I love you, Mama. Don't be sad. I'm okay now." I tried to look into the darkness to see her, but all I could see was my dresser across the room. The little voice spoke again. "Close your eyes, and you will see me." Hesitant but desperate to see my baby girl, I closed my eyes. Instantly, I was transported back to the white room from my dream. This time, there was a little girl with red curly hair and brown eyes, wearing a pink dress and white sandals. She ran up to me, wrapped her tiny arms around me, and kissed my stomach. Her smile was so innocent, so pure, so genuine. I bent down to kiss her, and she whispered in my ear, "I am always with you, Mama." She turned and started to walk away, and I tried to follow her, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if something was holding me in place. Then I heard a different voice saying, "You are still needed." When I opened my eyes again, it was daylight. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace in my soul. I could finally accept her passing because I knew, deep down, that she was okay. There's always one family member we connect with in a special way, and for me, that person was my pa, my mom's dad. When I was little, my mom would always say that I was his shadow. Wherever he went, I wasn't far behind. Pa wasn't one to show much affection through hugs or words, but all 4 of his grandkids knew how much he loved us. He would build us rope swings, tell us stories from his childhood, set us straight when we were in the wrong, and dry our tears when we were hurt, or when some boy broke my heart, or my cousin Jesse's. As the second oldest grandchild, I was always somewhere in the middle, right between my older cousin David and my younger brother Sean. Jessie, being 4 years younger than me, was often more in her own world, so I had to be one of the boys or do my own thing. I was always building forts, throwing pine cones pretending they were grenades, and shooting BB guns, while most girls were playing with baby dolls and dress-up. Although I still liked dolls and dress-up, I knew better than to do that around the boys. But as all good things do, this chapter of my life eventually came to an end. We grew up, got jobs, and started our own families. Unfortunately, my pa's health took a turn for the worse. We learned he had COPD, a serious lung disease, and with his severe diabetes already taking a toll on his body, his will to fight was fading. After 3 months in and out of the hospital, we brought him home for hospice care. Since I worked nights, I'd go over during the day to help take care of him with my cousin David, while our Nana worked. I started to feel very nauseous and exhausted, but I chalked it up to the stress and lack of sleep. After a week of feeling worse, something told me to take a pregnancy test. Given that my doctor had told me my chances of getting pregnant after my first miscarriage were slim to none, I ignored the nagging feeling. But it wouldn't go away. So, before work one night, I took the test. To my shock, it came back positive. I felt a mixture of joy and fear, but I decided to keep it to myself for the time being, with everything else going on. The next day, while I was alone with Pa in the house, making sure he was comfortable, he grabbed my hand and said, "Little girl, you listen to me good. I know this old crud is going to get me, but don't you cry one tear. I've lived a good life, and I've watched all my grandbabies grow up. I'm proud of all of you, understand me?" I choked back my tears and smiled, kissing him on the forehead. His voice was shaky, and I knew it took everything out of him to say that. "Yes, Pa, I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I told him I loved him, and I left to go back to work. That night, his words kept rolling in my mind, and it took every ounce of strength not to break down. He had lived a good life, married to my Nana, had 2 kids of his own, watched us 4 grandkids grow up, and even met his great-grandson. But the thought that he would never get to meet my baby broke my heart in ways I couldn't explain. I wanted to beg God for more time, for a miracle, but deep down, I knew that Pa wouldn't want to keep suffering. The miracle I had hoped for was already growing inside me. Not long after that thought, the phone rang at work. It was my mom telling me that the nurse said if we wanted to be with him, we needed to come soon. I told my boss, who let me leave early. When I stepped into their small house, I immediately felt the heaviness of death in the air. They were just about to take off his oxygen. I approached his bedside, took his hand, but couldn't say a word. Remembering my promise to him, I gently squeezed his hand. For a brief moment, I swear I felt every ounce of his pain, his labored breath, sink into me. But for that moment, he looked peaceful. Then we heard the monitor beep, and I watched him take his final breath. His grip on my hand released, and I heard deep within me, "An old life passes, a new life begins." I have held on to those words ever since. At his funeral, when I walked up to his coffin, I could smell his scent and feel a warmth surrounding me. I knew it was his way of letting me know he was still with me, and for that I was thankful. 8 months and a week later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. It was a day filled with family and congratulations. My little one and I were exhausted, so after Lily woke up for her feeding, the nurse ushered everyone out of the room. As I was settling in with Lily, I heard light footsteps in the room. Thinking it was a nurse coming to check my stitches, I covered up and turned to see no one. But I heard Pa's voice. "She is beautiful. I am so proud of you." I knew then that Pa had come to visit my baby girl. It was one of the best moments of my day. Even now, with Lily being 2, Pa still comes to visit us. Just the other day, it was just Lily and me in the apartment. I heard her squeal in the playroom and say, "Hey there!" I knew her dad hadn't come in because I would have heard the door open. So I went to check on her, and there was Pa, sitting on the floor watching her. It was the first time I had seen him since he passed. He turned and smiled at me before walking away. I was surprised Lily saw him, but I'm glad she got to meet him, even if only in spirit. In June 2014, my parents, my sons, my sister, and I headed to the Northern Cape to visit my mom's brother, Uncle Tim, in a small town called Petrusville. We hadn't seen him in 5 years, and the trip was meant for healing. There had been family politics that kept us apart, but my dad was insistent that my mom make peace with the past and visit him. From the moment we arrived, the atmosphere was filled with love and acceptance. My mom and Uncle Tim buried the issues they had, spending the weekend reminiscing and reconnecting. My mom always told my sister and me that though her older sister had taken care of her for much of her life, she and Uncle Tim shared a bond that made them soulmates, not in a romantic sense, but in a way that helped them survive everything, good or bad, together. Uncle Tim had been a truck driver, and in 1992, when I was 8 years old, he was in a horrible accident. The truck he was driving went off course on a mountain pass, and in a desperate attempt to prevent it from going over, he grabbed his sleeping co-driver. When the seatbelt constricted around his neck, it broke his neck in 2 places, leaving him a quadriplegic. Going from a strong, muscle-built man to someone who couldn't do anything for himself was incredibly difficult for Uncle Tim. There were moments when he didn't want to keep going, but he always found a reason to fight. The doctors had told my mom that they didn't expect him to live more than 7 years in his condition, but he proved them wrong. Fast forward to June 2014, on Monday, the 16th, as we were packing to leave, Uncle Tim was still in bed. We took turns saying goodbye to him, and when I knelt beside him, I kissed his cheek. As I left the room, a feeling came over me that I couldn't shake. I suddenly had the sinking feeling that this would be the last time I saw him. I fought back tears as I left and got in the car with my family. I told my mom about my feeling, but she brushed it off. On Saturday, June 21, 2015, I woke up at 11:55 p.m. to use the bathroom. As I sat there, I heard a woman crying hysterically outside, and the sound was heartbreaking. Then my phone rang. It was my mom crying, telling me, "My child, Uncle Tim just passed away." The shock nearly knocked me off my feet. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the flat. My mom was lying on her bed, shaking with grief. I climbed onto the bed with her, and she buried her face in my neck, crying uncontrollably. After a while, she managed to tell me that Uncle Tim had a bleeding ulcer that ruptured. He literally drowned in his own blood. His wife and best friend had tried to keep him alive, but they were 45 minutes from the nearest hospital, and there was no time. As we sat there, heartbroken, I reminded my mom of something I had known a year ago. We had been in Petrusville to say goodbye. The next day, Family and friends came and went to offer their support. Tim and Elaine, two close friends of ours, were also there. Tim, who is also a medium, sat on the edge of my mom's bed and told her he had a message from Uncle Tim. He said that at the moment Uncle Tim passed, he received a mental image of chains breaking. Tim told my mom that Uncle Tim wanted her to know that he was free now, that the chains binding him to his broken earthly body had been broken, and he was now walking again. As we sat there, music was playing from my mom's tablet. The song that had been playing suddenly stopped, and "Who'll Stop the Rain" by Creedence Clearwater Revival began. This song was special to my mom and her brother, though she never told us why. My mom squeezed my hand, and through her tears she said, "My soulmate is free." Even now, my mom still breaks down when she hears songs they loved or when Uncle Tim comes up in conversation. We all miss him deeply. He was a wonderful man, and we all loved him. While my mom regrets the years they didn't speak, she is grateful she had the chance to say goodbye. And to me, that's what truly matters. My mom passed away in 2002 at the age of 37 from complications of lupus. I was 19 years old at the time, and now I'm 32. Her death left a huge void in my life, and as I got older, I often wished I could have had her guidance through so many important moments. Fast forward to last September, when I was planning my wedding. It had been in the works for over 8 months, and the stress was overwhelming. As anyone who's been through wedding planning knows, it can be extremely emotional, especially when you're dealing with a big Indian wedding for 150 guests over 3 days. Moms typically play a huge role in planning and organizing, and I was feeling frustrated and alone. My younger sister, who's been a godsend, helped as much as she could, but there was only so much she could do. My fiancé, now husband, and I were also struggling with the pressure. 3 weeks before the wedding, we had a huge argument. His mother was taking over the wedding planning as if it were hers, and I was at my breaking point. I was crying, angry with God, feeling like I had no one to back me up. That evening, after a long day, I came home from work and just collapsed into bed. Usually, I'd pray and do some chores, but that night, I was exhausted. I finished work at 4:30 p.m., so it was early, but I just needed rest. Around 8 p.m., I woke up and noticed the time. The house was calm and peaceful, and at some point, I drifted back off to sleep. In my dream, I heard footsteps coming from the lounge, and someone pushed open my bedroom door. It was my mom. She walked to the other side of my bed and got in next to me. By then I had sat up, and she took my hand and said, "Stop stressing so much, don't worry. Everything will be okay. The wedding is going to be wonderful. I'm with you through this, and I will be at the wedding. Help is coming." She then told me to go back to sleep, gave me a hug, and we both lay back down. I woke up the next morning to the lingering smell of my mom in my bedroom, and I knew in that moment that she had been there with me. That morning, as soon as I arrived at work, my phone rang. It was a close friend of mine. Let's call her A. She's like a second mother to my sister and me, and even though she had been busy with her own life, she said, "D, I'm so sorry I've been so busy, but I'm available from now until the wedding. I'm here to help with anything you need." She had been swamped with her own daughter moving to Mauritius, but she stepped in to take on the role of my mom during the final weeks leading up to the wedding. The night before the wedding, my sister and I stayed over at A's house, since it was closer to the venue. As we sat together that night, A told us that a few weeks earlier, she had dreamed of my mom. Even though my mom hadn't explicitly asked her to help, A felt she had to step in and offer her support. I knew that, even though those were just dreams, my mom was communicating with us. She was right there, helping me through it all. After the wedding, during a quiet moment alone, I took a breath and thanked my mom. It was then that I felt an overwhelming warmth fill the room and smelled her scent in the air again. I knew she was still with me. My maternal grandmother, Bailey, was a sweet and loving woman. She was the only girl in a family of 6 children, living in Mexico City during the early 1900s and the turbulent years of the Revolution, the Mexican Civil War. Her family was part of the old-fashioned tradition where children were seen but not heard. Though she managed to break this pattern with her own children, her brothers, except for Uncle P, the youngest, grew up into bitter men who struggled with the changing world around them. They turned into four odd, isolated men who never left the family home, living with my great-grandfather until his passing. Bailey and Uncle P were the only ones who got married and had children. The other four brothers never married, claiming they could not find a woman who could measure up to their mother, my great-grandmother. When Bailey became pregnant and her belly began to show, my great-grandmother told her not to visit the family home, fearing it would set a bad example for her brothers. But family is family, and Bailey made sure to teach her children to love and respect their uncles. When the time came, she expected the same respect and love from her children's children. I remember how terrible it was to visit my great-grandfather and uncles when I was a child. Before we left the house, my mom would list all the things we weren't allowed to do: play, laugh, run, ask questions, stuff our mouths with cookies, interrupt conversations, or touch anything. And all the things we were supposed to do: sit still, ask for permission to use the toilet, be quiet. Fortunately, because social life wasn't a priority for my uncles, those visits were few and far between, and they were rarely reciprocated. I don't have any fond memories of those visits to my uncle's house. As my siblings and I grew older, we found more excuses to avoid going. Years went by, and Bailey was the first of her siblings to pass away. A couple of years later, Uncle Roo, one of the Bitter brothers, also passed unexpectedly. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend his wake because of work. That evening, I came home late and had to spend the night alone while the rest of the family went to the funeral home. I went to bed, turned off the lights, but couldn't fall asleep. I tossed and turned, eventually positioning myself with my back to the wall. After a while, I started feeling uneasy. It was as though someone was watching me, their eyes fixed on my back. A sense of disappointment and reproach filled the room, and I knew it was Uncle Roo scolding me for not attending his vigil. I wanted to get up and run out of my room, but I was afraid I might see my uncle's spirit standing there. So I stayed still, pretending to be asleep while silently apologizing in my mind. I explained why I couldn't attend the funeral, begging him to understand. The feeling of being watched lingered, lasting what felt like an eternity, before it finally faded and I was able to fall asleep. The next day, I went to the funeral. After that experience, I began to understand my uncle's behavior. His lack of outward affection was only a facade. Deep down, I believe he longed for connection and love, but perhaps he never knew how to express it. I often wonder if he tried to show love in his own way, only to be told that men shouldn't express affection. I know my uncles weren't bad men. They were simply four odd, lonely men to whom the simplest joys of life were denied. And I think my uncle's spirit, in that moment, was showing me a glimpse of the love he had kept hidden. Since moving out of the flat during my divorce, I made a point of not going back unless it was absolutely necessary. When we had tenants renting the place, I didn't need to go there much, but when the tenants moved out, my mom decided to move in. Suddenly, I had to go there quite often. The atmosphere in the flat always felt thick, as if the air itself was harder to breathe. One night in April 2015, my mom sent me a message, telling me that strange things had been happening in the flat. She wasn't one to be openly spiritual, so I rushed over to see what was going on. When I arrived, she was sitting in the lounge and asked me to step into her room to tell her if I smelled anything unusual. As soon as I entered, I noticed a very distinct smell of cigarette smoke. The smell was strongest around her closet, but as I moved towards the bed, it faded. There was no one outside the flat who smoked, and the closet wasn't near any windows, so the smell being concentrated there made my hair stand on end. I asked my mom if this was the only thing happening. She told me no. She'd been feeling someone grip her ankles while she lay in bed. At first, it was just a sensation, but one night, something took hold of her legs, pulling them halfway off the bed. Panicked, she started kicking, and for a brief moment, she swore she had kicked a solid human being. But no one was there, though the smell of smoke lingered. A few days later, I had Tim and Elaine over and shared the story with them. Tim went into the flat alone while Elaine and I stayed outside by the pool. About 5 minutes later, Tim came back out and said that the person in the flat was a man, middle-aged. He gave a detailed description that had my mom and I looking at each other in shock. Tim said the man tried to stay in silhouette, with his left arm visible, but his right arm hidden. I went into Adam's room and grabbed my mom's wedding album. I showed Tim a picture of my paternal grandfather. Tim nodded and said the man in the flat was my mom's father, Johnny. Johnny had lost his right arm in a car accident. He was also responsible for the abuse I suffered in that very flat, not to mention his role in my grandmother's death when she was only 32. My mom was 5 at the time. Neither my mom nor I were happy about the idea of him being in her home. My mom asked me to take all the pictures of Johnny out of the album. She took them, handed them to Tim, and asked him to burn them. After destroying every picture, Tim told us what he needed to cleanse the flat. He went in alone and worked for close to 2 hours. By the time he finished, it was late afternoon. He told us that he wished we could have seen how Charlie and both my grandmothers had played a role in driving Johnny out. That night, my mom went back into the flat. For some strange reason, the main electricity switch was off. She switched it on and went to her bedroom. Not long after, my son T came into the flat and told her he smelled smoke. Considering they're both asthmatics, this was a huge concern. My mom ran out of her room to find a box she had set down on the stove had caught fire. She had never cooked in the flat, so the stove's mains were always switched off. Yet, every plate on the stove was glowing red, set to full heat, and the box was burning. My mom screamed and grabbed T, rushing to get out of the flat. Tim rushed in, grabbed the box, threw it into the sink, and doused the flames. Outside, both my mom and son were having full-blown asthma attacks. After Elaine and I helped them calm down and breathe, we speculated on how the stove had turned on, something that had never happened before. Tim, looking grim, simply said, "You burned my pictures. I will burn you." A sick parting gift from a vengeful spirit. My parents divorced when I was just 3 months old. My dad, who was deeply troubled, was an alcoholic with serious psych issues. He lived in Kentucky, while my mom and nearly all of her family lived in Pennsylvania. Dad had a small family, just his mom, his aunt and uncle, and me. He had lost custody of his older son when he was only 3 years old. I was visiting my dad as part of a court order when my dad's uncle, my great-uncle, passed away. It felt ironic because my grandfather had also passed on September 16th a few years earlier. My paternal grandmother was heartbroken. She had loved her brother deeply, and he was one of the last family members she had left, despite her often being a rather difficult woman. I remember my great-uncle with a strange fondness. When I was little, I would visit his and his wife's house near Dayton, Ohio. I would play with the custom train model he built in his basement. It was amazing, and I've always had an unusual fascination with trains, planes, and cars. Though I don't remember much of him now, since he passed when I was still under 10, I recall that he was very tall, towering over me, probably more than 6 feet. He wasn't the talkative type, but I always liked him. One night, I was staying at my grandmother's apartment. She had 3 cats, and I was allergic to them, so I was sitting on the futon in the living room. The living room was dimly lit, and the blinds on the porch door were half open, letting a little bit of light filter through. It was a ground-floor apartment, and the cats could go outside through the door, but it was too dark to see anything outside at that moment. My grandmother, as usual, was in her room reading from her prayer books. I don't even remember what I was doing, other than sitting there feeling uncomfortable from my allergy, trying to ignore the cats. Then, suddenly, I saw it. A shimmering black shadow glided in front of the glass door. I was frozen, too terrified to move, as I watched it drift slowly toward my grandmother's room. The shadow was enormous, towering over me and almost reaching the ceiling. My first thought was that it reminded me of my great-uncle. A few moments later, my grandmother screamed from her room. I jumped up and ran to her, asking if she had seen it too. I was relieved to hear that she had, so I knew I wasn't imagining things or losing my mind. We both calmed down after a while, and, as we talked, we came to the conclusion that it must have been her brother, my great-uncle, coming to visit in what seemed like a somewhat eerie but undeniable way. My grandmother had always been interested in ghost shows, so it wasn't a leap for her to think it was his spirit. Even now, we sometimes talk about it, and neither of us has wavered from the belief that it was her brother, coming to visit her one last time. But we could be wrong. May 28th, 2015. 2 days after my birthday. The day my world stopped spinning. The day my beautiful mother passed away from a stroke. I won't go into too much detail about that time, as it was incredibly traumatic for me. I witnessed everything. I will mention, though, that the aneurysm was on the left side of her brain, which is significant to what I'm about to share. I also apologize if my story feels all over the place. The last 6 months have been a blur for me. At 7:30 p.m., I received the phone call from the hospital informing me that she had passed. Later that night, though I can't remember exactly when because everything feels like a haze, after hours of sobbing, I was sitting in the living room with my boyfriend when, suddenly, I experienced a crippling pain on the left side of my brain. It felt like a headache, but it was incredibly intense, a throbbing and aching sensation that lasted no more than 20 seconds. I thought it was a strange coincidence, considering the aneurysm was on that side of her brain. A few days later, another strange event occurred. I had placed my mom's phone on the cabinet in the lounge room, hoping to be able to answer any calls about her passing. It was an older-style touchscreen Samsung phone, locked with a patterned swipe. Only my boyfriend and I knew the pattern. I walked past the phone and noticed that it was unlocked. I was immediately confused. I checked to see if any of the cats had stepped on it, but then I realized that wouldn't explain it. They couldn't unlock the phone. I asked out loud, "Did anyone unlock the phone?" My boyfriend and I were the only ones who knew the pattern, and he was sitting outside with my best friend at the time. Neither of them had touched the phone. The third and most bizarre thing happened a few weeks later. My best friend and I decided to visit Pinero Valley Memorial Park with our dogs. After walking around for a while, we found a spot by the lake to sit and enjoy the view. We came across a memorial plaque with a name that caught my eye. Lewis. My mom's last name. To my surprise, the plaque was decorated with carnations, which had always been my mom's favorite flower. It didn't end there. After sitting by the lake for a while, we decided it was time to go. On our way back to the car, my best friend spotted something on the ground. I bent down to pick it up and was stunned to find a broken snow globe featuring a kiwi bird, with Kiwi New Zealand written on it. My mum was born and raised in New Zealand. The coincidences felt like too much to ignore, and I couldn't help but wonder if they were signs. Signs that my mum was still around, reminding me she was with me in some way. Tomorrow, November 13th, is my mum's birthday. The 28th of this month will mark 6 months since her passing. I can't help but wonder if another unexplained coincidence will appear, something to give me hope during this difficult time. On Saturday, November 7th, 2015, I experienced something that shook me to my core. In the 2 weeks leading up to that day, 2 people I knew and loved had collapsed and had seizures. This brought back painful flashbacks of my cousin, who passed away in 1999 due to a seizure. I had witnessed her go through 3 episodes, the last one being particularly horrifying, where I woke up to find her choking. Her dad later told me that if I hadn't woken up, she could have died that night. In the month that would have marked my cousin's birthday, November 18th, these events struck a nerve. The emotions I had buried were suddenly resurfacing. I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was around me, watching. Odd things kept happening, like feeling someone's presence when I walked through the gym room or hearing knocking on the door to Adam's room, Adam being the spirit of the 5-year-old boy who lingers in my house. I knew Adam didn't do that. One day, while I was digging through old photos, I found a few pictures of my cousin. I showed one to Tim, my friend, and asked him if he knew who it was. He just laughed, not thinking much of it at the time. My boyfriend, exhausted from the stress, had gone to bed early. Tim was sitting outside, listening to music, while I was taking a shower. Elaine, who was with me, kept me company, and at one point she ran outside. Afterward, she came to tell me that Tim had something to say, but didn't know how to bring it up. Elaine relayed the message. Tim had been visited by my cousin and had a message for me. This hit me like a ton of bricks. Let me explain why. Since my cousin passed away, I'd always wondered if I could have done something to keep her from dying. I was only 15 when she passed, and I never made peace with it. I had been hoping for a sign from her, a message that she was okay. So when Tim came into my life, and when family members, from the other side, started showing up, I would ask if they'd seen Carly, my cousin. I always got the message that she was okay, and would make contact when she was ready. Well, it turns out she picked that night to do so. Tim spoke to me in his calm, steady way and said, "Your cousin has a simple message for you. She wants you to know 2 things. 1, I'm okay, and 2, you couldn't have done anything." I had never told Tim about my regrets. I never mentioned how, 2 days before she passed, I had been in and out of their house so quickly that I never even said goodbye. She was so happy that morning, and I ran out without properly acknowledging her. 2 days later, I was standing in the lounge, watching as the undertakers removed her from the house, wrapped in a gray blanket and strapped to a gurney. To this day, I can't touch gray blankets. The morning of her funeral, I insisted on going to see her at the funeral home. Standing in that little room, looking down at her in the beautiful white coffin, looking like she was peacefully sleeping, I broke down. I couldn't say goodbye. When I heard Tim relay her message, I began crying uncontrollably. Tim immediately apologized, but I told him there was no need. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, and hearing her message was overwhelming. Tim took my hand, helped me up from the couch, and led me to the gym. He pointed to the right, near the door to Adam's room, and said, "She's right here." I could feel her energy around me. I asked him why she chose that room, and he told me, "She knows how much time you spend here. She knows she can be close to you here." We went back to the couch, and Tim was heading outside when he took his phone and played around with it for a few seconds. Then he handed it to me and said, "She wants you to listen." The song, "Ice Cream Days," by Jennifer Hall began to play. My cousin and I used to love that song. As the song played, I started crying harder. Elaine came over and rubbed my back, comforting me as key phrases from the song made the tears flow. Tim then said, "She wants you to remember 2 little girls with dolls and a tea set. Remember the ice cream days." Later that night, Tim and Elaine's son got sick and was in bed. He called out for his mom, and when she came back, she told me that my boyfriend had heard and seen what was happening, and it freaked him out. Though he had experience with spirits, he usually tried to avoid them. Tim suggested I go talk to him, and ask him not to be upset. I found my boyfriend, and he didn't look at me at first. He asked if I was okay, and I said I was. He finished in the bathroom and then took my hand, leading me outside to the lapa where he lit a cigarette. After taking 2 drags, he looked at me strangely and said, "I was fast asleep, but something woke me up. I was instantly awake and wide awake, not tired at all. I've been awake nearly 48 hours, and I had barely slept 20 minutes. He told me he walked outside and stood in the doorway to Adam's room. He watched me cry for a few minutes, and then something poked him in the ribs. There was no one around, just him and Adam. The poke came from someone taller than him. Though it didn't scare him, it was strange. He told me that seeing me cry just reaffirmed for him that he was where he was supposed to be. He didn't want to give us up. He was in tears, which, for him, a tough guy, a weapons and tactics specialist, was a big statement. For a relationship of only 3 months, that was incredibly solid. When my mother passed away unexpectedly at 55 from a heart attack, my primary feeling was anger. She had been seeing doctors for months because she wasn't feeling well. She underwent a battery of tests and procedures, costing around $6,000 out of her pocket since she had no insurance. It was exhausting, and in the end, the doctors started insinuating that she was a hypochondriac. Anyone who knew my mother would know that was the last word you'd use to describe her. She was hurt by this, and it made her feel like she didn't matter anymore, that she was invisible, simply because she was no longer working and was older. She had retired about 4 years earlier due to arm pain and high blood pressure, following her doctor's advice. A few weeks after her funeral, while getting dressed for dinner, I was going through my closet when I came across a blouse I had never seen before. It was a fancy, dressy blouse, and I was immediately puzzled. I had no idea where it came from. I had recently semi-retired and moved to a rural area, and I had gotten rid of most of my business and fancy clothes. All I kept were jeans, sweats, ski clothes, and flannel shirts. I hadn't shopped for clothes in over 4 years, as I wasn't someone who enjoyed dressing up. I had plenty of clothes. The blouse was the only dressy piece in my sparse wardrobe, and it hung in a very obvious spot in my closet. It was so out of place that it didn't make sense to me. After getting dressed, I had the idea to check the label and the price tag. In my family, it was common for us to shop second-hand, especially for well-made clothes that we couldn't afford new. We would often find things from brands like Chanel, Christian Dior, Armani, or Versace, not because we were being snobby, but because we admired the quality and craftsmanship of these designers. I expected to find a high-end designer label, and when I checked the blouse's label, it read, "I love you." My heart jumped into my throat, and I felt a rush of shock and confusion. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew instinctively that it was a message from my mother, but I immediately rejected the idea. I thought to myself, "This is ridiculous. You're being irrational." I then noticed that the price tag was handwritten and from a second-hand store, confirming that I had never worn the blouse. In that moment, I started to feel warm and fuzzy inside, the idea of my mother giving me a final farewell bringing a strange comfort. I loved her deeply, and the thought of her reaching out to me from beyond was overwhelming. But then, a wave of fear hit me. What if it wasn't her? What if it was some evil spirit pretending to be her, taking advantage of my grief and anger at her loss? That thought frightened me, and I shut down. I rejected the idea that it was my mother's message, and in doing so, I closed myself off to her. It took me over 5 years to let go of that anger, and I've regretted not accepting the comfort my mother tried to offer me. I wish I had acknowledged her message, telling her I heard her and felt her good wishes for me. In later years, I've come to accept that it really was her, and now I find comfort in that thought. I know she understands why I reacted the way I did and forgives me for it. My mom was born on December 3, 1928, and she passed away on December 5, 1983, when I was 27. Not a day goes by that I don't think of her and miss her. This past weekend, my friends Elaine and Tim, along with their kids, came over to visit. Tim, who has had the ability to see and communicate with spirits since he was a child, is always an interesting presence in our lives. He's often drained by these interactions, physically exhausted, his head throbbing, but he says he can't ignore spirits when they need to communicate. After the kids had been swimming and Elaine and I were sitting outside chatting, Tim mentioned he was tired and decided to lie down. I told Elaine I had specific questions for Tim regarding a presence I had been feeling around me for the past 2 weeks. She mentioned it to Tim, and when he woke up, he agreed to help. I asked him if he could sense anyone near me, because for days, I had this feeling of not being alone, at home, in my car, or at work. He paused for a moment, then described a man, tall, over 6 feet, light brown hair, wearing glasses, and in his mid to late 20s. I immediately said, "That sounds like Charles." Tim stood up and said, "Say hi to him, he's here." I felt a strong presence again and stood up too, my body covered in goosebumps and shaking slightly. Tim lit a cigarette and then looked at me, saying, "Charles doesn't like cigarettes." He explained that Charles was nudging his hand to get him to put the cigarette out, which made me laugh. Charles had been a health-conscious guy, always at the gym, and he hated smoking. As we stood there, Elaine's youngest daughter, just 3 years old, walked into the room to ask her mom something. She walked right up to where Charles was standing, then sidestepped around him. She did the same thing when she walked back past him later. I asked Charles why he was here. He said that although he had passed, he had a strong feeling that my family needed protection, and he'd been looking out for me for some time. I asked if he had been around when my son, Tyler, was in a coma in 2008, close to death multiple times during those 32 days. Charles confirmed that he had been there, always on the left side of the room, next to Tyler's ventilator. I then asked if he had been with us the night my twins were born, and Tim, channeling Charles, sighed and said, "You like asking dumb questions, Dolly." Which made me laugh. Dolly was his nickname for me. A thought crossed my mind about an event during the long weekend of September 22nd, 2012, when we were visiting my dad in Mozambique. While driving at night through a mountain pass, I had an overwhelming feeling that I needed to keep driving, despite my mom suggesting I let her or my aunt take over. As I approached a sharp turn, headlights appeared, and I saw a truck overtaking another, heading straight for us. I felt completely calm, and my hands moved instinctively, steering the car safely into the emergency lane, just missing the truck by inches. I didn't react like I normally would have. I asked Charles if he had anything to do with keeping me calm during that moment, and Tim confirmed, relaying that Charles had been with me and had calmed me down. I burst into tears. After I composed myself, I asked Charles questions only he could answer, questions that no one but him would know the answers to. One of the things I asked him was if he was the one responsible for making the TV turn on by itself when we had a comedy DVD playing. Tim smiled and said, "He says it was Bart Simpson." "You didn't see me do it, you can't prove it." Charles used to pull pranks like that when he was alive, and he'd always say the same thing when I caught him. Tim then became serious and said, "Charles wants to know why you don't know where your candles are." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Just days before, during a power outage, I had been frantically searching for the candles in the dark while my kids were panicking. I had felt someone in the kitchen with me but didn't think much of it at the time. Now I understood that Charles was with me, as he often was. Charles also mentioned that I shouldn't fall asleep with my phone in my bed. He said he sits behind the driver's seat in my car when I'm driving, and that sometimes, the ball the kids left in the back seat would roll to the front and hit my feet. I've often gotten annoyed by this, thinking it's just an inconvenience, but Tim added, "You never get scared, you just get annoyed." As though Charles was playing around, still finding ways to make me laugh. I now know that the presence I've been feeling is Charles, more often than not. He's always near, looking out for me and my family, especially with my mom soon moving back to Mozambique. It's reassuring to know that he's still around, watching over us, and I feel grateful to have him by our side. I've been living in my house for 7 years now, and from the very beginning, I've sensed the presence of two entities here. One, I believe, is my grandmother, who passed away when my mother was young. My mom always said she could feel her mother's presence, especially at night, when she would wake up and find her standing by her bedside, watching over her. Despite the loss, my mother was always comforted, knowing her mom was there protecting her. The other presence I feel is more recent, and I've gotten to know it better over time. It's a male presence, whom I thought was a friend of mine who passed away years ago. However, recently, my friend Tim, who has the ability to communicate with spirits, told me that the male presence is actually a little boy around 4 or 5 years old. He's playful but not negative. I didn't expect this revelation, but it made sense, especially considering how the swing set in the house often swings by itself, and little kids always seem to sense his presence and smile at nothing. The boy has a way of running around the house and sometimes tapping on counters, making his presence known in a playful way. But it was the way he interacted with my kids and other people that really struck me. Children especially tend to notice him, even when I don't, and he's always there, almost like he's watching over them. One night, Tim mentioned that the female spirit in the house also had a negative connection to the way she passed. She had been murdered, and Tim could feel the heaviness surrounding her presence. I hadn't realized that this was the case until Tim confirmed it. But overall, both spirits seemed to be there without ill intentions, just existing in the space, watching over us. A few weeks ago, I had a strange experience. Tim came to visit, and while we were sitting outside, I asked him to check the energy around me. I had been feeling a sense of unease, like I was being watched constantly, even at work and in the car. Tim sat down and began describing a man who was with me, a tall man in his late 20s with brown hair and glasses. Immediately, I thought of my friend Charlie, who had passed away. Tim confirmed that it was him and said that Charlie was there, watching over me. The connection felt so strong that I could almost feel him standing next to me. Later that evening, we were talking about the past when a strange thing happened. Tim asked me if Uncle James, Charlie's adoptive father, had a nervous tic or habit. I said that yes, he often twirled his hair around his finger, and Tim immediately said that Charlie had shown him this detail. It was strange but also reassuring, confirming that Charlie was trying to communicate. As the evening went on, I noticed a change in the atmosphere whenever Uncle James was near me. The nervousness I had been feeling grew stronger when he was around, and Tim explained that Charlie was still nervous about his father's presence. It was as if there was unfinished business between them, but Charlie was there, sticking close to me, trying to protect me. Later, when I asked about the unsettling feeling I had been experiencing all week, Tim explained that it wasn't mine, it was Charlie's emotions coming through. He was scared, and that fear had manifested in me. After learning this, it made sense. It was like Charlie was living through his unresolved feelings, and I was the one he used to express them. The next morning, I woke up to a noise, something knocking on my window at 1:20 a.m. It was a neighbor, asking for help because his girlfriend was in a violent, drunken state. I could feel Charlie's presence strongly during this, but he didn't want me to speak up. He seemed to be guiding me to stay calm and avoid adding to the tension. After everything settled, I went back to my room, but I could feel Charlie walking back and forth, pacing near my bed, keeping watch over me. It was comforting to know that, despite his own struggles, he was still there, looking out for me. Even though Charlie's presence can be unsettling at times, I feel safe knowing he's with me. His spirit continues to protect me and my family, even when there are unresolved emotions lingering between him and his father. I promised not to tell Uncle James about any of the supernatural occurrences, and so far I've kept my word. But I'm grateful for the way Charlie continues to show up, offering his protection and watching over us from the other side. On July 23, 1970, at 5:20 a.m., we welcomed our third child into the world, a beautiful baby girl named Angelique, though we often called her Angel. From the start, she was a radiant child, full of joy, laughter, and wit, a bright spark who brought happiness to everyone around her. As she grew, her charm and warmth captivated everyone who knew her. In March 2002, Angel married, and in August 2004, she became a mother to a beautiful girl named Sheenie, who quickly became the center of Angel's life. However, in September 2008, Angel's world turned upside down. She was diagnosed with cancer, something she had been unknowingly battling for a year and a half. Misdiagnosed for months with a simple groin strain, she finally learned the devastating truth: she had cancer. Despite undergoing numerous operations, radiation, and 2 rounds of chemotherapy, Angel remained determined to fight for her little daughter, Sheenie. On Sunday, June 3rd, Angel was taken to the hospital, in severe pain, by her friend and neighbor. By Tuesday, June 5th, we received a call from our eldest daughter, Nikki, telling us to come quickly as Angel was not expected to live much longer. Ray and I rushed to the hospital, where we were shocked by how much Angel had deteriorated since the day before. That night, Nikki and I stayed at Angel's bedside keeping watch. Angel was on oxygen, her breaths coming in shallow, painful gasps. At one point, Nikki asked her, "Are you scared to die?" Angel responded simply, "No." I held her hand, trying to comfort her as best I could, but it was clear that her time was nearing. Around 2 a.m., Angel stopped making the raspy breathing sounds. Nikki and I thought the end had come, but when we looked at her, her eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites. I wasn't sure what to say to Nikki, so I quietly told her, "Yes, she's sleeping." I didn't want to upset her more than she already was. Later, I saw a shadow move over Angel, from her feet to her head. At first, I thought it was Nikki returning from the bathroom, but when I looked, there was no one there. I whispered, "Dad, is that you?" But there was no reply. I felt the tension ease a little, but still couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. When I told Nikki about it, she was stunned, having no idea what I had just witnessed. At 5:30 a.m., I went outside for a smoke, feeling restless and unsure of what was happening. A Cape robin, a shy bird, landed near me, looking directly at me. It pecked at the ground and then flew off when someone arrived at the hospital gates. I couldn't help but wonder if it was a spirit, a message of some sort. Back inside, I spoke to the night nurse, asking her if the oxygen was keeping Angel alive. She confirmed that it was possible. As she checked Angel's vitals, the machine didn't register anything. She muttered something about a faulty machine, but I knew better. I could feel Angel slipping away. Then, something miraculous happened. As I leaned over to tell Angel how much I loved her, and that I would never forget her, she opened her eyes and looked directly into mine. In that moment, it felt as if our souls met. I told her to rest in peace, and then, with a final breath, she passed away at 6:10 a.m. Later that day, Kate, the friend who had been with Sheenie, told us that Sheenie had woken her up at 5:40 a.m., crying from a nightmare where her mommy was dead. She described a man in black who had taken Angel away. I couldn't help but feel that the connection between mother and daughter had transcended even death. 2 mornings after Angel's passing, Ray woke up to a voice saying, "Dad, don't worry, I'm in a happy place." It sounded like his own voice, but I assured him that it was probably Angel's way of communicating. She wanted him to know that she was okay. On Ray's birthday, he heard Angel's voice again, saying, "Happy birthday, Dad!" He turned, expecting to see her, but she wasn't there. Still, the voice seemed so real. About 5 weeks before Angel passed, I had a vivid dream. I was standing on a hill, watching a city disappear like mist before the sun. A tsunami was forming in the distance. As I looked to my left, I saw Angel running toward me. We joined hands and ran together to escape the wave, but I woke up before it could hit. After Angel's passing, I realized the dream was symbolic. The tsunami represented death crashing into Angel's life and changing mine forever, but we were together, even in the face of it all. While I can't explain everything that happened in those final days, I now feel at peace, knowing that Angel is still with us, in spirit, watching over Sheenie and the rest of our family. In the fall of 1997, I rented an older, small home in Midtown Tulsa from a friend. She had recently moved out to care for her elderly father after her mother passed away from cancer just 2 weeks earlier. Before I moved in, my friend, 2 other people, Jane and her husband, and I went to repaint the house. It was completely empty, no furniture or appliances. We opened the windows to air it out because of the strong carpet cleaning detergent and paint fumes. It wasn't toxic, just a bit strong. We had been painting since morning and by 4 p.m., we were getting hungry. While waiting for pizza, we kept painting, but soon noticed it was getting cold and breezy. We assumed it was because of the open windows and it being mid-October. So, we shut the windows, and the house warmed up a little. We sat on the floor to relax, waiting for the pizza. Jane went to the bathroom, which was just around the corner. When she returned, she stopped in the doorway and asked, "Who put on perfume?" We all laughed, and said no one had. She insisted, "No, really, who bathed in perfume?" Again, we told her it wasn't anyone, just the smell of paint. But she kept saying it was getting stronger. So, one by one, we got up to check, but none of us could smell anything like perfume. She could still smell it, and said it was getting stronger. Right then, the pizza arrived, and we forgot about it for a while. As we ate, sitting on the floor in the middle of the living room, Jane suddenly said, "That's so weird. I don't smell the perfume anymore." I asked if she could smell the pizza, and she said yes. The paint? Yes, she could smell that too. Then, she said, "I recognize it now, it was Giorgio." She knew it because it wasn't one of her favorite scents. My landlord friend, who is full-blooded Cherokee, literally went pale. She choked, spit out her pizza, and even squirted Coca-Cola through her nose. We all started slapping her on the back, trying not to laugh too hard. When she caught her breath, she said, "Oh my God, you guys! My mom wore Giorgio all the time. She would never leave home without putting it on." That's when we all went silent, realizing what just happened. We quickly finished eating, cleaned up, and locked up for the night. I guess my friend's mom, Rose, came by to check on the house and make sure everything was okay. I remember the first day I met Josh. It was 7th grade, and I had just moved to North Carolina from Georgia. I was sitting on the school bus with my friend Amelia when a small, slightly pudgy kid with a bowl cut plopped down in the seat in front of us. He was full of energy and confidence. He turned around, said hello to Amelia, and then introduced himself to me with a polite handshake. From that moment, we became close friends. I looked forward to every bus ride home, catching up with him and hearing his funny stories. We talked every day until I started high school. I missed my little friend when I moved on to high school, but freshman year passed quickly, and soon I was a sophomore. Josh entered high school the following year, and I was stunned. My short, round little guy had grown into a tall, dark, and handsome young man. We enjoyed the freedom of mingling with other grades, and even shared the same bus again. We tried dating in my junior year, but quickly realized we were better off as friends. Josh confided in me a lot. He struggled with resentment toward his mom and the choices she had made, started experimenting with drugs, and felt trapped inside himself. I did my best to help, but he always put on a brave face. I graduated in 2003, leaving Josh to make his own senior year memories. As I started college and working, I stayed in our hometown, so I ran into him a few times. The last time I saw him was at the bank. I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, and he rubbed my belly as he introduced me to his fiancée. He was so happy, telling me how well he was doing in life. It warmed my heart to see him so content. About a year later, on Halloween, I got the awful news that Josh had committed suicide. They found him in a closet at his home. He left a note, saying that life was too hard for him. I was devastated. I couldn't stop wondering if there was something I could have done to help him see his worth. Maybe if I'd stayed in touch more, I could have prevented this. The grief felt unbearable. The day of his funeral, I had 2 young children at home. My husband stayed home from work, and I went to the receiving of friends. It was a horrible day. He looked so peaceful in his casket, just as handsome as I remembered him. They'd included pictures and letters in his casket, and I struggled to hold back my tears as I said my final goodbye. Later that week, I was washing dishes in my kitchen when the silence weighed heavy on me. Alone with my thoughts and memories, I started to cry. Anger mixed with the grief, and I shouted aloud, "Why? Did you not know how much you were loved?" I gathered myself after a few minutes and carried on with my day. That night, after tucking my children into bed, I drifted off to sleep. What happened next stayed with me vividly, as though it happened just moments ago. I dreamed I was in our high school, in the commons area where we all used to hang out before class. The place was completely empty, except for Josh. He sat on a bench, beaming at me, motioning for me to come sit with him. It felt like déjà vu, like our morning ritual when we were classmates. I sat beside him, tears welling up, and began to cry. He reached out and dried my tears, then put his arms around me and whispered, "I'm sorry." I looked at his face. He was beautiful. His skin like porcelain, his hair shiny and perfect, he even smelled good. He placed his hand on my cheek and told me, "No one could have stopped me." I sat there, just looking at him, for what felt like hours. Then the bell rang, signaling class time. He glanced over his shoulder, turned back to me, and said, "I can't stay any longer, my time is up." He stood, gave me one last hug, and said, "I still love you," with that same adorable smile from middle school. He walked toward the double doors that led outside, and I stood there, watching him leave. Then I woke up. I sat up in bed crying, covered in goosebumps. I'll never forget Josh coming to me in that dream and letting me know he was okay. I'll cherish that memory until the day I see him again. In January 2009, I was at concert choir practice on a Saturday morning when I got the news that would change everything. I wasn't told much, just that I needed to go outside where my sister was waiting. When I got home, I walked into a room full of grief-stricken faces and learned that my childhood best friend and her parents had been brutally murdered by their schizophrenic adopted son. The shock and sadness hit everyone hard, but my brother's fiancée took it the hardest. She was very close to them. The girl was like her little sister, and the parents were like her own. This tragedy has haunted her, affecting both her personal and professional life to this day. Fast forward to Sunday, March 11, 2012. I had spent the whole day at my brother's house, and for the first time in a week, my sister-in-law was feeling somewhat calm. She hadn't had a panic attack, and her mood was much lighter. Around 10 p.m., we went to pick up some groceries. When we got back and started unloading, she handed me a few items to take upstairs and put away in her room. I grabbed them and made my way up the dark staircase. I entered her room, turned on the light, and set the items on the bed. That's when I noticed something odd. The dream catcher I had bought her for Christmas was spinning above me. The fan was off, the windows were closed, and there was no draft. I didn't think much of it at first, just shrugged it off. I turned off the light and started to head out of the room. That's when I saw them. Directly across from the room was a large mirror, and in the reflection, I saw my sister-in-law's parents standing behind me. Their hands were on my shoulders, and their faces were full of sorrow. But their faces weren't like I remembered them. They were bloodied, with holes all over them, likely a symbol of the brutal way they had died. I didn't look back. I ran down the stairs and quickly told my sister-in-law that everything was fine, despite the fear gripping me. The rest of the night felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the unease, pacing between the kitchen and the front door, waiting for my mom to come pick me up. As I waited, I made a few trips to the door, peeking out, desperate for my mom to arrive. It was on the third or fourth time I checked that I turned around to see her, my childhood friend, my first love, my sister-in-law's little sister. She was gliding down the stairs, her eyes locked on mine. Her smile was the same one I used to adore, but her face was bloodied, like her parents', with holes all over. I couldn't move. I walked into the kitchen, trying to hide my emotions from my sister-in-law, not wanting to upset her any more than she already was. I don't know why they chose to show themselves to me, but I have a few ideas. First, I think they wanted me to talk to my sister-in-law. She has carried the grief of losing them every single day, crying over it, and refusing to let go. I understand how hard it must be, but I feel like they're stuck with her, waiting for her to heal. They want to move on, but they can't until she does. I think they showed themselves to me in the hope that I would talk to her, help her release some of that pain, so they could find peace. My second theory is more scientific. Maybe the dreamcatcher triggered some sort of memory in my brain. It could have brought the image to the forefront of my thoughts as I looked into the mirror. Perhaps my mind created the vision because of all the subconscious emotions tied to that object. I'm not sure how it works, but that's one possible explanation. Before I end, I want to say that I have, in a way, recovered from the loss. It was devastating, and for a long time, it felt like I couldn't move on. But eventually, I did. Not a day goes by that I don't think about them, but I take comfort in the thought that they're in a better place. But this experience has shaken me. Seeing them again, so bloodied and tormented, makes me wonder if they're really at peace. I worry that they're stuck, waiting for my sister-in-law to heal and let go of the grief she's been holding on to for so long. When I first met my husband, Rob, we realized we had a lot in common. Both of our dads had cancer. We were both one of 2 kids, and we had the same breed of dog. But one thing that stood out was how much of a prankster both our dads were. His dad would always play tricks on him, and my dad was the master of pranks at our house. A few weeks into dating, I was invited to Rob's house for dinner and a movie. I was nervous, but excited to meet his family. As we drove over, Rob warned me that his dad sometimes took jokes a bit too far and told me to let him know if I wasn't comfortable with it. He said his dad appreciated Spitfire girls. We arrived, and before I even had time to process, his dad came running out of the living room at full speed, wearing nothing but a t-shirt and his underwear. I just stood there, shocked. A few minutes later, his dad reappeared, clearly embarrassed. I tried to lighten the mood by saying, "If it weren't for the fact that you have nowhere to put them, I would have thought someone stole your keys and you were chasing them down." His dad burst into laughter, so much that I thought he might choke. Right then, he decided I was a keeper. We had a whirlwind courtship and ended up married after just 5 months of dating. Soon after our wedding, Rob's dad's health declined, and he had a central line inserted into his neck for cancer treatment. It became painful for him to bend over and even put on pants. He mostly stayed in his underwear, with a blanket over him, only getting up when necessary. I often joked with him when I caught him in his undies, saying, "I know the house is locked, so there's no way anyone has stolen your keys." After weeks of treatment, the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do, and his cancer had become too advanced. We began preparing for the inevitable, and Rob's dad tried to keep things light-hearted despite everything. When the day came, I called Rob to tell him he needed to come home. Oddly, I didn't feel sadness, just peace. The next few days were a blur of funeral planning and mourning. Throughout this time, I kept hearing heavy footsteps in the upstairs bedroom, the one that had been his. The sounds would move from his room to ours and back again. It happened at all hours and started to feel like a regular occurrence. I remember wanting to laugh each time, but I didn't want anyone to think I wasn't taking the situation seriously. On the day of the funeral, I was upstairs getting ready when I took my keys off the table by the bed and put them in my purse with some tissue. When we left the house, I realized I couldn't find them. I thought maybe they had fallen out, but when I went to go back inside, I remembered that we had locked the door. I asked Rob to unlock it, but he said he thought I had my keys and left his inside. We had no choice but to call a locksmith. While we waited for the locksmith, we shared stories about Rob's dad, the pranks he'd pulled, like replacing my fish with chicken while camping, ordering salt and peppered squid at a Chinese restaurant to make us believe he knew Chinese, and the time he replaced the sugar with salt for my sugar cookies. The locksmith arrived and quickly got us inside. I went straight to check for my keys, and to my surprise there they were, hanging on the removable deadbolt. I would have noticed that on my way out, so I told the locksmith that I must have put them there while gathering my things. As I walked to the car, I couldn't help but smirk. Rob asked if I found my keys, and I said, "Yep, your dad stole them." Rob looked at me confused, then laughed. I truly believe it was Rob's dad's last little prank, just like all the others. He always tried to one-up me, especially with my keys. It felt fitting that, even after he passed, he still found a way to prank me. Since then, we've had other encounters with Rob's dad. It's not scary, just comforting. When something goes missing, we jokingly say, "Alright, Brad, yes, it's funny, but put it back." It's a little reminder that he's still around, adding his touch of humor to our lives. I'm 27 years old and a workaholic, which is probably why I chose to stay single. After my last relationship, which was difficult, I decided to keep to myself and focus on my daughter. I didn't plan on dating or getting close to anyone, especially since I don't trust people around my child. I was raised to respect certain beliefs, and I never really questioned them. Since I was a kid, I've always seen things that felt different. I wasn't scared, but I knew it wasn't normal. I've had people close to me pass away, and though I grieved, I eventually moved on. I remember seeing a shadow of a man. I couldn't see his face, but I knew somehow he was old. I kept this to myself until one day my little sister told me she'd seen things too. We talked about it, and I found out I wasn't the only one. She used to panic about it, sometimes even having panic attacks, but eventually she got used to it. We told our parents, and my dad told us not to be afraid to ask it questions. I never really worked up the nerve though. I saw it, and it saw me. That was enough. I stopped seeing things for a while, but about 10 months ago, I started talking to someone new. We talked for hours, and over time, I began to like him. The situation was complicated. He had just gotten out and was deported, unable to return to the US. He lived near the border, so we started making plans for me to visit him. One evening, during one of our conversations, he asked, "Why can't I be with you? I wish I'd met you a long time ago." Without thinking, I blurted out, "Maybe in another life." He asked, "Why would you say that?" I didn't know why, but when I said it, I felt this deep sadness, and I almost started crying. I hung up the phone, unable to explain what I felt, but I knew I was falling for him. The next day, I was on my way to visit my brother in Waco, and I told him I'd call when I was on the road. I stayed on the phone with my friend for about 5 hours. We decided to take a break and text each other for a while. After about 45 minutes, he stopped replying. I figured he'd fallen asleep, but when I called him the next morning, there was no answer. I told my sister-in-law that I had this funny feeling that something was wrong. She didn't like it when I said things like that because it was usually true. The day went by with no word from him, and my mind started racing. Eventually, I found out he and his brother had been kidnapped and murdered. My world fell apart. I reached out to his family, and through social media, his cousin confirmed what had happened. It was September when I got the news. I lit candles and prayed for them. My mom used to say spirits could hear you if you talked to them, so I started talking to him. I was heartbroken, asking him if he was okay, apologizing for what had happened. One day, after I'd cried until I couldn't anymore, the words, "Maybe in another life," popped into my head. I froze, and that same sadness came back. I told him he would always have a special place in my heart. I asked him to let me know if he was okay, not caring how long it took or how he communicated it, but I needed to know. About 2 months later, his cousin messaged me out of nowhere. She said, "I had a dream last night, and it felt so real. I saw them walking into the house. The first thing they said was, 'We're home.' We got lost for a bit, but we're okay now." She had never met me but felt she needed to tell me. When I read her message, I felt a nervous laugh escape me. I knew then that he was answering my question. Now, sometimes I talk to him, and in my head, I hear his voice. I can't tell if I'm imagining it, but it feels real. I told myself to stop, that people would think I was crazy, but I keep talking to him when I'm alone, especially when I'm in the car or by myself. Sometimes one of his favorite songs will come on, or I'll see something that reminds me of him. My name is Beth, and I'm 14 years old. I live with my dad, mom, and 2 younger siblings. When I was young, we lived in an old house that was half of an old police station in West Bromwich. I think it's been knocked down now. but I'm not sure. The house had 2 dining rooms, one of which was connected to a utility room. When I was around 4 or 5, before Matt and Ray were born, I had an imaginary friend who lived in that utility room. His name was Robert. I used to play in there with him, and I remember telling my dad that Robert was tall and dark, with a funny voice. I stopped playing with him when Matt was born, and when my dad asked me why, I said, "Robert doesn't want to play." Or, "Robert doesn't like the baby." Strange, right? In 2008, we moved into my dad's great-uncle Ron's house, which had been left to him in Uncle Ron's will. The house was big, 4 stories, including the attic, and located on a road called Chapel Lane, near an old Sunday school that no one uses anymore. We've been living here for 3 years now, and while we love the house, my dad and I both feel like it's haunted. My mom hates it though, and tells us off if we watch ghost shows. But we can't help it. My dad and I are both fascinated by paranormal things. Anyway, I want to tell you about something that happened just last week. My step-cousin Ashley passed away from lung cancer a month ago, at just 18 years old. She had always told me, "Do what you like, have fun, go where you want to go. You're right if you believe in what you're doing." Her passing was really hard for me, and she left behind her family, Reese, 20, Bradley, 15, and Davy, 14. Last week, her family came over to visit, and I was especially happy to see Bradley, who's like a brother to me. Everyone was hanging out in the living room, but Bradley and I were in the dining room on my dog's bed, chatting. Poppy, my chocolate lab, was lying in front of us when she suddenly lifted her head and stared at something in the kitchen. Her ears flattened, and she started wagging her tail, but she was whimpering at the same time. Her tail was wagging so fast and hard that it startled both of us. She never barks, but suddenly she barked once, and it made us both jump. Bradley petted her and asked, "What's the matter, Pops?" Poppy snapped out of her strange behavior and went back to being her usual self. We told everyone what happened, and my dad joked, "Might be a ghost, eh?" I laughed, but my mom scowled and snapped, "Don't be stupid." My dad, a bit more serious, said, "Your mom's right, that's silly." Afterward, Bradley and I went to my room. I plugged my dead phone into my iPod dock to charge, and after a few seconds, my phone lit up. The song that started playing was How to Save a Life by The Fray, and it started right at the line, "Let 'em know that you know best, 'cause after all, you do know best." I know for a fact I wasn't listening to this before. The reason we went upstairs was because we'd been listening to Drake, and my phone had died. So we went up to charge it and keep listening. Freaked out, I pulled my phone out of the dock and attached it to the charger under my bed. Later, after my aunt and cousins left, I told my dad what happened, but my mom exploded. "I don't want to hear any more of this childish nonsense, Beth and Olivia. It's all bull." I was surprised, since my mom had never sworn at me before. I didn't get angry. I just stared at her and said, "Whatever," then went upstairs. That night, while I was in bed, I was scrolling through my music. The same song, How to Save a Life, played again, starting at the same line. This time, the volume was all the way up, and it almost burst my eardrums. I pulled the earbuds out and looked at the screen, which had a black number 9 on it. I didn't get a good look before I threw the phone across the room and ran to my little sister's room to sleep on the floor. I still don't know what the number 9 means. In the morning, I went back into my room to find my bed made. My family was still in their rooms, so I was really confused. I sat on the floor, picked up my phone, which was dead again, and noticed 3 long, blonde hairs on my pillow. Now my family all has dark hair, my mom, my dad, my siblings, and me, except for my dad, who has short blonde hair. I don't know what all of this means, but it's been really unsettling. It's like Ashley's spirit is trying to communicate with me, and it's both comforting and eerie at the same time. I just can't shake the feeling that she's still around, in some way. My grandfather was an amazing man. He taught me so much: how to set tile, how to paint, how to drive, and many life lessons. He was a tile setter by trade, and we spent a lot of time together. When my daughter was a toddler, my grandfather had a heart attack and needed a pacemaker. A few years later, when my oldest son was just over 10 months old, he had another heart attack that put him in the hospital for the rest of his life. One day, I was visiting him in the hospital with my brother and younger sister. Both of them stepped out of the room for a few minutes, and that's when things took a turn. He became very restless, and as I was about to press the call button for the nurse, he grabbed my hand tightly, as if it was his lifeline. He made me promise that I would take care of my grandmother, and I promised him I would. A few days later, he passed away. The day of the funeral, my grandmother walked up to me in tears, asking what she was going to do now. I reassured her, saying everything would be okay because Grandpa made me promise to take care of her. And I did. I called her at least once a week and visited her once a month. Whenever something needed fixing around her house, my husband was always there to help. A few weeks after Grandpa passed, I started having dreams where he would talk to me but then just walk away. These dreams always seemed to happen right before I had to wake up for the day. Then, one morning, I had the same dream, but this time it ended differently. Instead of walking away, Grandpa walked up to me and gave me a hug. I woke up in tears. My husband asked why I was crying, and I told him about the hug. He held me, and we both cried for a few moments. Then my husband asked something strange. He said, "Did you put on perfume?" I said no, but he insisted that he could smell something familiar. He went into the bedroom to get dressed, and came back out quickly, saying he could smell the same scent in the room, only a little stronger. I asked him if the scent smelled like Old Spice, Grandpa's cologne, and he got pale and said, "Yes." That's when I knew Grandpa had been in the room with us. A few months later, I got pregnant, and things got a little scattered. If I forgot to call Grandma by Thursday, things I put down would be moved. I'd say, "Okay, Grandpa, I got your message. I'll call Grandma, thank you." The same thing would happen if I didn't visit her by the third week of the month. Once, when my husband was putting in a tile countertop, he ran into a problem. One of the tiles wasn't fitting properly on the corner, and he was about to make the counter look terrible by installing it diagonally. He asked me to figure out a solution. I closed my eyes for a second and thought. Grandpa talked to me. A moment later, I came up with the solution. I suggested filing down the tile so it wouldn't be noticeable. It worked perfectly. One night, around the time of the Belmont Stakes, I had a dream. Grandpa told me to bet on the number 4 horse. I followed his advice and won several $100s. I would have won more, but my husband insisted I bet win, place, and show on the same horse. About 2 years later, my father-in-law passed away. Now, on top of raising 3 kids, I also had my mother-in-law to look after. My father-in-law loved to joke around, and we had a playful banter when he was alive. But after he passed, strange things started happening. Keys would go missing from their hook and reappear on the counter. I'd put something down, and 2 minutes later, it would be gone. I'd say, "Okay, Dad, put it back," and sure enough, the item would be close to where I had left it. Sometimes, my keys would even be found on the wrong hook, as if my father-in-law was playing a joke on me. Though Grandpa's activity had quieted down, I could feel my father-in-law's presence in small, mischievous ways. It was like he was still around, watching over me in his own playful way. In 2000, my grandfather passed away after a long battle with cancer. He was a simple man, deeply devoted to the Catholic faith, particularly to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I was 8 years old when he was diagnosed. For 3 years, our family visited him every day, watching him struggle with his illness. My memories of those days are still vivid. One afternoon, while I was playing with scissors on the dining table, my grandfather, lying in bed, scolded me with his last words. "Toto, be good." That was the moment I left the room and joined my sister and cousin outside. Shortly after, I heard my mom screaming and my grandmother crying. We rushed back in to find that my grandfather had passed. I don't remember much after that, except that I fell asleep beside his bed. That night I had a dream. I found myself in an empty, white room, with no walls to distinguish it. In the center stood my grandfather, looking much healthier than he had been. He seemed to be searching for a way out when three well-dressed men appeared, beckoning him. But when they turned into monstrous, winged creatures, my grandfather ran toward a bright, blinding light that made the creatures vanish. Standing in the light was the Virgin Mary, holding the baby Jesus. My grandfather smiled and entered the light. I woke up in tears. Later that evening, during my grandfather's wake at his house, my grandmother called the family together. She told us that my grandfather had shared the same story with her before he died. The three men had come to take him, but the Virgin Mary had intervened, just as I had seen in my dream. My grandmother told us that my dream was a sign that my grandfather had reunited with the Virgin Mary. A few months after my grandfather's passing, my family gathered for Christmas. This was the first Christmas without him. We tried to make it as normal as possible for my grandmother. While we were at my grandparents' house, our housekeeper answered the phone at our home. She claimed she heard my grandfather's voice, wishing her a Merry Christmas and inviting her to lunch. It was a strange and comforting moment. Even in death, my grandfather seemed to be doing what he loved most, talking on the phone, connecting with the people he cared about. Now, as I reflect on these events, I realize that my grandfather's spirit never really left us. His love, his care, and his connection with us continued even after his death. Whether through dreams, signs, or the memories we cherish, he's still with us in a way that words can hardly describe. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In December 2012, we set off on a trip to Mozambique, full of excitement. We packed the car the evening of December 14th, and intended to leave at 3 a.m. on the 15th. But thanks to my aunt, we didn't get going until 4:10 a.m. I drove the first leg of the journey, but by 7 a.m., I was struggling to stay awake. My eyes kept closing involuntarily. As luck would have it, the last time my eyes shut too long, I felt a tugging on my hair. It woke me up just in time before I got too close to the car ahead of us. We got stuck at the border between South Africa and Mozambique for over 4 hours. It was boiling hot inside the car, and everyone was uncomfortable. While we were stuck, I managed to get in touch with Tim. He told me that Gran was with my mom, making sure she was coping, since she had major surgery just a week before. Charlie was also with us, happy as can be, just like a kid in a candy store. After a grueling 16-hour trip, we finally arrived at my dad's house in Mozambique just after 8 p.m. We were exhausted, but relieved to be there. The holiday had its ups and downs, mostly due to my aunt, who has a knack for being unhelpful and a bit stingy. Gran, who was not happy with her behavior, expressed it through Tim, telling me how she had hoped my aunt would have learned better from her. One evening, Gran was fed up with my aunt. Tim messaged me, asking me to stay out of the room, as it was time for Gran to have a stern talk with her. Later, Tim asked me to listen for the closet door, and sure enough, I heard it slammed shut. Gran was busy with my aunt for about 45 minutes. Afterward, Tim sent me another message, saying I could go to bed. I was sitting in a comfy chair, watching a movie, when I felt Charlie sit down on the floor in front of me, his back resting against my legs. My legs tingled with the sensation. Then, Gran appeared beside me and started playing with the chain around my neck. Tim told me that Gran was fascinated by the chain, saying she wished she could have had something so lovely when she was alive. Earlier that day, I asked him to check in with Gran about something. Tim told me Gran was outside under the carport. Due to the high malaria risk in Mozambique, we stayed indoors after dark, but I knew Gran would hear me. So, I went to the bar and called out to her through the window. When I looked outside, I saw a shadow in the darkest corner near the trailer. I could barely make out the figure, but I knew it was Gran. I went back to my room and messaged him, telling him about the encounter. Tim confirmed it, saying that Gran smiled at me in surprise, thinking it was my dad coming into the room. That night, Gran told Tim that she wanted me to start hearing her more clearly. She wanted to communicate directly with me, so she cut herself off from Tim and Charlie. Instead, she started communicating through Elaine. Later, while I was in the ocean with my boys, I heard a male voice calling my name twice. It felt like it came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Tim confirmed it was Charlie. From that point on, I began talking to Gran and Charlie regularly. I got so comfortable with their presence. Gran loved sitting under a mango tree, watching the boys play. Whenever they fell, Tim could tell me exactly where they were hurt because Gran had shared the information with him. The beach trips were particularly fun, and my boys loved the water so much, it was a battle to get them out. Charlie was no different. One night, Tim and I were discussing past relationships when Charlie decided it was time to show Tim the pain my ex-husband had caused me. Tim saw my memories of pain, terror, and anguish. Charlie also revealed that my ex had planned to kill me multiple times, but never succeeded, perhaps because Charlie intervened. I remembered things I had buried deep inside, and while it was painful, it was also liberating. Charlie kept apologizing through Tim, saying he never meant to cause me pain, but he had always been there, watching over me. On New Year's night, I was woken by my mom's blood-curdling screams. I rushed to her side, and as I approached the corner to her room, I was suddenly pushed against the wall by Charlie. When I reached her, she was holding my son, still screaming, looking into the kitchen. She told me someone had tried to break in. The intruder was halfway into the kitchen window when she screamed, and he fell backward and ran away. I immediately felt Gran's intense energy. She had been in the kitchen, protecting my mom and my son. I believe the intruder got a glimpse of an angry ghost before he fled. From that night on, Gran and Charlie were always with me, especially during moments when I was alone. When I was anxious or scared, I would feel hands on my shoulders, calming me. Gran told Elaine that my aunt was scared of her because she had a secret, one that she thought died with Gran. Now Gran's presence made me feel safe, but I knew that only time would reveal the truth. Throughout that time, I came to realize that Charlie and Gran were always there, guiding me, comforting me, and protecting my family. My mother, a strong and self-willed woman, owned and ran a pub by herself. She passed away at 75 after suffering a heart attack. The last time I saw her alive was a few weeks before she was scheduled to undergo a hip replacement surgery. We had our ups and downs, but I always felt a strong bond with her, one that seemed to go beyond words. I had a sense that she feared the surgery, even though she had already gone through 2 other hip operations. But the pain and immobility had left her no choice but to go through with it. When I said goodbye to her before leaving, our hug lingered, and something in me told me it could be the last time I would see her alive. Sure enough, after the surgery, she went into renal failure and became gravely ill. Still, she recovered and was sent home to finish her recovery. 2 days before she passed away, I spoke with her on the phone. I could tell something was off in her voice, but I convinced myself it was just exhaustion. Deep down, though, I knew it might be our last conversation. She was found by the brewery delivery man and rushed to the hospital. After suffering 4 more heart attacks, she passed away. I flew back home the next day, and that afternoon, I went to see her body. I wanted closure, and I also wanted to apologize for something I had said to her when I was younger, a thoughtless remark I never took back. The hospital had done their best to make her look natural, but her hair was combed in an unusual way, and her mouth was slightly open. As I stood there and spoke to her, something strange happened. Her face seemed to move in a lifelike way, and for a moment, I thought she was still alive. I apologized for my past words, and as I did, the blanket covering her body suddenly lifted, as if responding to me. My first thought was that the body wasn't secured properly, but there was no draft or reason for the blanket to move. The room was windowless, and at no time did I feel fear. It was almost as if she was signaling her forgiveness. Days later, my sister and I had a heated argument at the pub. When I went into my mother's living room afterward, I found that a heavy armchair had been tipped over, and some blocks under its feet had been broken. My mother had always hated when we argued, and we both felt that this was a message from her, another sign that she was still watching over us. Later that day, I was in the pub cellar, sorting through some of my mother's paperwork, when I heard strange noises upstairs. It sounded like someone walking in a hurry, with uneven, quick steps. I assumed it was my niece preparing a meal in the kitchen, but when I asked my sister later, she told me no one had been there. Everyone had left. Oddly, I realized I wasn't standing under the kitchen, but near the pub's restroom. In her later years, my mother suffered from IBS, and she spent a lot of time rushing to the toilet. For the next few days, I felt a cold chill whenever I passed the restroom door. While sorting through the papers with my sister, we heard the brass bell on the counter ring. I thought it was her children returning, but she told me they wouldn't be back until the next day. When we checked, we found the building was empty. The bell had rung on its own, something neither of us could explain. In the days that followed, I felt my mother's presence many times. Slowly, it seemed like her energy was fading, as if she was moving on. Even though she had always believed there was nothing after death, I sensed that she was still with us, guiding us in her own way. In December 2012, my fiancé and I were preparing for our long-awaited trip to Mauritius. After arriving at the airport 2 hours early, standard for international flights, we spent the time at a coffee shop using the free Wi-Fi. As I checked Facebook, a notification popped up, reminding me of a friend's birthday, Dr. G, a flamboyant surgeon I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. His status update revealed he was trekking across Alaska and northern Canada to the Bering Sea with his old hiking partner. Dr. G, a tall, curly-haired man with clear blue eyes, had been one of those people who always seemed to be in the midst of something adventurous. We had met a few years prior at the hospital where we worked, and though our friendship was brief, it was memorable. Excited about our trip, I logged off and didn't think much more about it. We flew directly from Durban to Mauritius, landing at Sir Siwusagar Ramgoolam International Airport in the southeast of the island. The journey to our resort in Grand Bay took us through fields of sugarcane, with the setting sun casting long shadows over the landscape. My excitement was met with a strange, uneasy feeling, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Mauritius exceeded our expectations. The resort was beautiful, a French-style whitewashed building with balconies overlooking the beach, a thatched roof bar, and palm trees around the pool. We spent the first few days enjoying the resort, swimming, snorkeling, and sailing. We explored Grand Bay's narrow streets and bustling waterfront, with luxury yachts contrasting against stray dogs and beggars on the beach. Midweek, we took an excursion to Île du Cocos, a marine sanctuary in the southeast. Being avid scuba divers, we were excited to explore the island's shallow coral reefs. That night, though, something odd happened. I woke up at 1 a.m., unable to sleep despite feeling tired. I went onto the balcony to listen to music and relax. The night was still, and the sky was clear with stars. I began thinking of Dr. G, wondering if he was out there in the wilderness, sleeping under the stars like he had planned. As I sang along to American Pie, a sudden feeling of dread washed over me. It felt like I was falling off the balcony, a sinking feeling in my stomach as if I were tumbling down a steep hill too fast. The sensation was so intense that I froze, unable to shake the terror. Just as quickly, the feeling vanished. My fiancé came out to check on me, and I shared the strange experience with him. He, too, didn't know why he had woken up at that moment. The next day, we spent an incredible time on the island snorkeling and exploring the old governor's house, which the locals believed to be haunted. The location felt peaceful, but I couldn't shake the strange feeling from the night before. We left Mauritius that Sunday, and the return flight was uneventful. The next day, back at work, the theater matron told me the devastating news. Dr. G had died a few days earlier. He had lost his balance and fallen off a cliff in the Canadian wilderness. The time of his fall matched the exact moment I had felt that intense, sinking sensation on the balcony in Mauritius. The U.S. Coast Guard had taken 2 days to locate and recover his body, just a few kilometers from where he fell. It had made the news in Alaska, Canada, and South Africa. A week later, I woke up on the couch after dozing off while watching TV. As I opened my eyes, I saw Dr. G standing in front of me, as clear as day. He said, "I understand everything," and then disappeared. I've never had a doubt in my mind that Dr. G reached out from the other side, connecting with me in a way that transcended distance and time. It was an experience I'll never forget. A few months ago, my nephew Tim's father-in-law, Dan, passed away peacefully in his sleep. To respect the family, I'll change the names in this story. After Tim was discharged from the military, he struggled to find work. So Tim, his wife Carrie, and their 2 young daughters, Grace, almost 2, and Sarah, newborn, moved from North Carolina back to New York to live with Carrie's parents, Dan and Rita. It worked out well since Carrie's sisters were already married and living on their own, so Dan and Rita were empty nesters. One night, Tim called 911 after finding Dan unresponsive. The operator insisted that Tim perform CPR, but Carrie was frantic, screaming into the phone that her father was already gone. Dan's passing was sudden and heartbreaking. A few weeks later, strange things started happening. Grace, the older daughter, began talking to someone who wasn't there. When Carrie and Rita asked her who she was talking to, Grace said, "Grandpa." They initially thought Grace was just missing Dan and was imagining it. Then the odd occurrences became more frequent. Dan's radio would turn on by itself, for no reason at all. One day, Carrie was alone with the kids and had to go check on them. She tossed a towel on the back of a chair and left the room. When she returned, the towel was neatly folded on the counter. My sister Elaine told me that Carrie got freaked out by these events and would call her over if no one else was around. I suggested to Elaine that Carrie, Tim, and Rita should try talking to Dan as if he was still there, and maybe that would help calm things down. Unfortunately, I couldn't talk directly to Carrie or Tim because of past issues between us, so I had to rely on Elaine to pass along the advice. Weeks went by with no word, until one day Elaine mentioned that the weird things kept happening, but no one wanted to talk about it. I didn't know if Dan had been visiting Carrie's sisters, as Elaine wasn't sure about that either. We were chatting one day about Dan and Rita, and Elaine started telling me how, when Dan was alive, they'd begun to be known as the Bickersons, due to their constant bickering. I didn't know them well, so I laughed and said, "They seemed nice." Without missing a beat, Elaine said, "Try taking a 5-hour car trip with them." I started laughing harder, and she asked why. I jokingly said, "Well, I can't now unless Dan decides to come along and Rita starts arguing with his astral self." It seemed like Dan was sticking around, watching over everyone, especially his granddaughters. He was only in his mid-60s when he passed, so perhaps he's waiting for Rita to join him in the afterlife before crossing over himself. But that might take a while. Rita is in her mid-50s. Tim and Carrie had been working hard to save up for their own house, but Rita asked them to stay with her. I'm not sure if it's because she wants to be near her grandkids or if she's feeling unsettled by the strange happenings in the house. It's clear that Rita might be reluctant to be alone, and perhaps she's not quite ready to say goodbye to Dan, even if it's just his presence that's lingering. When I was 14, my paternal grandfather passed away after a 2-year battle with cancer. While I was devastated, part of me was also relieved that he was no longer suffering. My grandfather had remarried when I was about 10 or 11, but I never really warmed up to his new wife. She didn't let me call her Grandma, and I could tell she didn't care much for my grandfather's adult children or grandchildren. This is important because of what happened at the funeral. My family, my mom, dad, younger brother, and I drove 3 hours to the funeral home where my grandfather's widow had arranged his service. When we arrived, we were shocked to find there wasn't a proper service, just a viewing. That didn't make sense. My grandfather was a rancher, and our family had lived on that land since Texas was a Spanish colony. He had many friends, and the neighbors, the closest one was 4 kilometers away, had known him his entire life. How could there be no service, no eulogy, no wake? The funeral home employee led us to a room, a nice one, where we could view the body. We expected to see my grandfather's widow there, but no one was around, not even any flowers, except the ones we had brought. It was heartbreaking. My beloved grandfather, who had touched so many lives, seemed so abandoned in his final moments. We decided to hold our own service. My father led it, and we took turns standing by the casket, placing mementos inside, saying prayers, and reading verses from the Bible. Then my father spoke about the things he loved about his father, the things he wished they had done together, and the regrets he had. As he spoke, the floor lamp by the head of the coffin started flickering. We didn't think much of it, assuming the bulb was about to burn out. There were overhead lights, after all. Then, as my mother spoke about what she remembered most about Grandpa, the lamp flickered again. This time, we all paused, exchanging looks. Was it just us, or was something strange happening? When it was my turn, I could barely speak. Grandpa and I had a special bond. We were like 2 peas in a pod, and I loved him dearly. I finally managed to tell the story of the time he drove all the way from Bryan to Houston to pick me up when I was homesick during summer break. I had been visiting my best friend in Houston, but after just a week, I was so homesick that I called Grandpa, asking if he could come get me. My parents couldn't make the trip, but Grandpa dropped everything and drove to get me, bringing me back to Dallas in one day. As I told the story, the lamp started flickering wildly, to the point that my mother got up to try and turn it off. But no matter what she did, the lamp wouldn't turn off, until it finally stopped flickering, at which point she gave up. Then it was my brother's turn. As he spoke, the lamp flickered again. By this point my dad said, "I think that's Grandpa. He's letting us know he's hearing all the nice things we're saying about him." We all agreed. After the service, we thought about waiting for Grandpa's widow to show up, but after about an hour, she still hadn't arrived. We decided to leave. During that time, the lamp never flickered again. When I was around 9 or 10, living in Alto Prado, Caracas, Venezuela, I had night terrors, though I barely remember them. According to my family, I used to wake the entire house, screaming at the top of my lungs, sometimes even twice a night. The only way to calm me was for my dad to hold me, rocking me back and forth. I would shake and sweat, even though I was freezing to the touch. This went on for nearly a year. My parents almost took me to a therapist but never did. Then, after my grandfather passed away, it all stopped. But that's a second part of the story. I don't remember the details, like what I said during those episodes, though my parents claim I once insisted someone was poisoning my brother. I only remember one event clearly. I screamed, and the light in my room turned on. My family rushed in. My brother stood at the foot of the bed, both annoyed and amused, while my mom called to me and put her hand on my forehead. My dad picked me up, rocking me in his arms. I could hear myself screaming, but it wasn't me. My inner voice screamed for help because I couldn't move, couldn't feel my body. I whispered, "I can't wake up, I can't wake up." As my dad held me tight, the tension eased, and I drifted off. When I woke up, I asked my mom if I'd had another episode. She confirmed it, but I told her I had seen it. She didn't believe me. She said my eyes were shut, tears rolling down, and I was just screaming nonsense. Then, there was the recurring nightmare tied to the night terrors. It always began as a cartoon. A little blonde girl in a pink dress skipped happily down a sidewalk, holding a strand of golden hair. But there was a heavy feeling, like someone was watching her with hatred. She reached a house, sat in a big blue chair, and stared up at someone, the source of the malice. Above her, an oval mirror reflected a blurry, gray face, except for the eyes. I couldn't look at them. I always closed my eyes. Suddenly, the dream changed. I found myself in a schoolyard, feeling abandoned. The sky was brown and gray, the playground covered with brittle leaves. There was no one around, but I could hear children's laughter echoing. Then, a rusty elevator creaked as it came down slowly. Beneath it, a panic scream echoed, growing louder as the elevator descended. The children's laughter turned into the squeals of pigs. Panic gripped me, and before I knew it, I was trapped under the elevator, unable to escape. Then the dream shifted again, back to the cartoon. The little girl had grown up, now in a long gown, walking into a grand hall with black and white checkered floors. She was being watched with deep hatred, and suddenly she was hurled into a dark space. I became her, feeling everything she felt. The space around me was shrinking, and I was pressed into a corner. I ran, but saw a tall, thin mother figure walking away, closing me in the dark. I screamed for her, called her, "Mommy!" begged her not to leave, but the corner kept closing in. I was suffocating in pure panic, screaming as I woke up. Needless to say, I was terrified of the dark, of what might be under my bed, or in my closet. One evening, after watching TV, I entered my room, turned on the light, and stepped inside. As soon as I did, the light turned off. I jumped back, but the light switch was off. Feeling silly, I turned it on again and went inside, quickly turning on my nightstand lamp. I jumped into bed to keep my feet from touching the floor. When my mom came in to say goodnight, she turned off the light as she left. I tucked myself in, making a little pillow fortress, only leaving my eyes exposed. I felt safe, but scared. Then, at 4 a.m., the lamp on my nightstand turned on. A soft, soothing hand caressed my face and neck, and a voice gently whispered, "Wake up." Still half asleep, I opened my eyes, thinking it was my dad. I got up to greet him, but when I reached the doorway, no one was there. The house was dark, and I could hear my parents snoring. I checked the clock, 5 minutes to 4. I wasn't scared though. I just felt calm, as if nothing had happened. Later that day, my mom sat me and my brothers down. She told us that our grandfather had passed away early that morning, and Dad had to leave for the US. From that day on, I never had another night terror, nor did I have the recurring nightmare again. My grandmother later told me that one of the last things my grandfather said was that he was going to miss watching me grow up. It's strange to think about, because I hardly knew him. But somehow, I feel like he's the one who ended those terrible dreams, and I'll always be grateful for that. "8 years ago, on the 24th of December, close to midnight, my granddad Ralph passed away from a heart attack, or at least, that's what I think it was. He died suddenly, and when my mom and I got the message that he was in the hospital, and had just taken his last breath, we were so shocked we couldn't sleep all night. For days, it didn't feel real. But did his passing stop him from being around us? Not really. A few years after he passed, maybe 2 or 3, things started feeling different at home. But it was me who felt his presence the most. At least, that's what I think. The rest of the family didn't really talk about it. My first experience with him happened when I was sitting at the computer, editing videos. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze wrap around my neck, only to vanish as quickly as it came. It was a hot summer evening, and there were no drafts or vents that could have caused it. I knew it wasn't just the air, it was something more. I've had strange experiences before, so I recognized it right away, but I was still confused. Not much happened after that, until my mom told me a story. One day, while cleaning the living room and wiping the TV, she saw what looked like 2 fingers swiping some dust away, almost as if someone was saying, "Hey, clean the TV, it's dirty." My granddad was like that, kind, but a little controlling. I had my doubts, but I still believed her. A couple of years passed with no more experiences, no strange feelings. But one night, when I was home alone, I went upstairs to finish some homework. As I was sitting down, I heard a loud male whisper right in my ear. "What are you doing?" It sent chills down my spine. I ran downstairs as fast as I could and ended up sleeping on the couch that night. When I told everyone about it, they didn't believe me. Once again, a few years went by with no experiences, as if my granddad was either playing with us or taking a break. The last thing that happened to me before things calmed down was one evening when I went to check the fridge in the basement. As I walked down the last few steps, I saw a figure in the corner of my eye, walking into the room where the heat generator was. I froze, then slowly walked upstairs. Since then, I've been nervous about going down there. I know it had to be him, but it still freaks me out. After all this, I decided I wanted to try to capture proof that the dead are still with us. A few times, when I felt brave, I went to places like graveyards or haunted spots, hoping to capture voices on my phone's recorder. My main goal was to get a message from my granddad. So far, I've captured 2 voices, but none of them were from him. As for experiences since then, there have been small moments, knocking on walls, footsteps upstairs, sudden chills, but they don't scare me anymore. It's more surprising than anything. The first experience I can remember happened when my grandmother passed away. I must have been around 3 or 4 years old. She had diabetes and, after contracting gangrene, refused to have her foot amputated. Slowly, she was dying in the house she shared with my grandfather. To communicate with him and their children, she would either call their names or ring a little bell by her bed. On the night she passed, almost all 9 of her children had some sort of experience where she communicated with them. None of them were even in the same house. My mother, for example, was in our kitchen 100 miles away when she heard my grandmother call her name. My aunt, several hundred miles away, was at Mass when a visiting pastor asked her if someone she knew had been very ill, because he saw a woman who matched my grandmother's description standing beside her during the offering. He had never met either of them. My uncle and his wife were in a hotel in another state when he suddenly woke up to see my grandmother standing at the foot of their bed. There were other stories from my mother, but those are the ones I remember the most. Then, in 2009, my father passed away while I was a freshman in high school. He had been in a car accident and knew his time was coming. He passed on March 9th, around mid-morning. My sister was in the kitchen when she heard him say, "It's okay, baby." He always called us sugar or baby. My younger sister, who was in the Philippine Islands at the time, woke up at the exact moment my father passed, yelling, "Daddy died!" There was no way she could have known. I didn't find out until later that night. After he passed, strange things started happening in our homes. My dad had given my older sister a seashell wind chime, which hung in her son's room. It started making noise at odd hours when no one was around. Given that my nephew was an infant at the time, it couldn't have been him. We also had this strange feeling when walking down the hallway, like we weren't alone. It wasn't scary though. In fact, it felt kind of reassuring. A few years later, I started to feel a strong push from under my bed when lying there. It was as if someone was trying to push me out of bed from underneath. We had just moved into a new house, and my mother told me she saw a ball move across the floor while we were all at school. I should mention that there were boxes under my bed, and the bed was pushed against 2 walls, so there was no space for anyone to get underneath without making a mess of my room. I don't think it was my father causing it, and it kept happening for a while. One day, a friend of mine was sitting on my bed when it happened to her. She got freaked out and asked me what was going on. All I could say was, "I told you so." Eventually, I started asking my dad, as crazy as it sounds, to make it stop. Maybe that's why it finally did. I've often wondered if anyone else has had similar experiences with family members lingering or making sure they said goodbye. Sorry for the length of this post. I tried to fit everything in. And does anyone else ever get a cold feeling on the back of their neck when they turn their back on a dark room? I also get night terrors from time to time, which can be pretty brutal. Some of them involve a ghost standing in a doorway, staring at me, or watching me through a window at night. That's my biggest fear. I hate the thought of something, or someone, being outside my home at night. A month ago, my granddad passed away, and today, I want to share some strange and coincidental things that have happened since. Not in a disrespectful way, but my mum is certain she can feel his presence, and she's convinced we've received a sign from him. For about 10 to 15 years, my granddad had been very ill. He reached a point where he couldn't walk or go out anymore. In the last years of his life, he mostly sat in his chair, watched TV, had family around, and went to bed early, around 6 p.m. I didn't think it was the best way to live, but now, though I miss him, I'm relieved that he's no longer suffering. I like to think he's in a better place, free of pain, happy, and maybe even younger again. A couple of weeks ago, my Aunt Linda shared a dream she had, and it stood out to us. She was alone in my grandma's house, but didn't feel alone. The presence in the house felt neither good nor bad, just neutral. She walked into their bedroom and looked outside through the window, which was directly across from the door. She recognized the same street, the neighbors, and the gardens. Everything was exactly how it was when she was younger. But then, when she looked at the sky, it was nighttime. Confused, she turned back to the houses, and suddenly, everything was lit up, not by the sun, but by an extremely bright white light, like mirrors reflecting light. She said there were 4 very bright lights, but she couldn't explain them fully. Then the dream ended. A week later, we had all but forgotten about the dream, when my mum and I went to a local garden center. While shopping, my mum spotted an outside wall ornament. It was a beautiful branch with mirrors at the ends, resembling flowers, and between the mirrors were 4 candle holders. The next day, she was outside, standing next to the ornament without realizing it. When she turned around, she saw the mirrors reflecting the sunlight very brightly. At first, she didn't think much of it, but later, it hit her. My mum has 3 other siblings, Linda, Chris, and Steve. My granddad had always been frustrated with the constant fighting between his children. My mum now believes that the 4 candle holders in the ornament represent her, Linda, Chris, and Steve. The bright light in the dream and the reflection from the ornament are still making us wonder if it's a message from him. Then, just recently, we had another coincidence. We were at my grandma's house on what would have been my granddad's birthday. Later, we visited his grave. Out of nowhere, my mum and dad felt the urge to tidy up his office. While cleaning, my mum found an old t-shirt she used to wear, along with a birthday card from a friend of Linda's, probably 30 years old. In the card, the woman wrote about how much she loved my granddad's tomato plants, and how she hoped he'd grow more for her if he had time. The day we found him passed in bed, this same woman had written a letter to my grandma, saying that the one thing she remembered about him was his beautiful tomatoes. Along with the card, my mum found a picture of my granddad's garden, his favorite flowers, chrysanthemums. He grew the biggest ones in the country, and people would travel from 2 hours away just to buy them. We had just bought chrysanthemums for his grave. My father, Jimmy, an advertising man with a knack for pranks, passed away from liver cancer in August 2000. He was a jovial person, loved by many, and we all have countless fond memories of him. Below are some of the most memorable moments we often share among ourselves. In the Philippines, it's customary to hold at least a 3-day wake before a funeral to allow family and friends to pay their respects. We would take turns catching some sleep during those long days. My father's wake was held in a memorial chapel to accommodate the large crowd that came to honor him. Some of us couldn't sleep in the chapel, with the heavy scent of flowers in the air, so we would head home for a few hours of rest. One day, my sister decided to go home and rest in our old room. She plopped onto the bed and quickly drifted off. Meanwhile, our maid, Ida, was downstairs cleaning. Suddenly, Ida was startled by my sister's scream. She rushed upstairs to find my sister in a state of shock, crying hysterically. After a few minutes, my sister calmed down enough to explain what had happened. She had been lying on her side when something urged her to open her eyes. When she did, she saw our father's face, lying on his side, staring at her with a stern and unhappy expression. Terrified, she sat up, and he vanished instantly. That's when she began screaming. What we learned later was that she had been pregnant at the time but hadn't told us yet. She never forgot the look on our father's face. Another night, as the crowd began to thin, my mother, grandmother, and aunt decided to get some rest at my aunt's house. It was a peaceful night, and they woke up refreshed. During breakfast, my aunt casually mentioned that she felt my grandmother's presence the night before. She'd felt a hand on her ankle while lying in bed. My mother, looking at her strangely, said she felt the same thing. They were surprised to find that my grandmother had slept in another room with my cousin. Over breakfast, my grandmother laughed and said, "It's Jimmy, up to his tricks again." It seemed he was still playing pranks, even after his passing. There were also strange occurrences at the chapel, especially around 2 a.m., when my brothers and some male cousins would sleep there. They'd often hear sounds from the kitchenette, slippers dragging across the floor, the fridge door opening and closing. When they mustered the courage to check, no one was there. My mother explained that during his final months, my father would drag himself to the fridge in the room and rummage through it for snacks. The noisy fridge door always woke her up. The last time my father made his presence known was on the morning of the 4th day, the day we finally laid him to rest. We had stayed up all night preparing for the funeral. After the services, we settled in at my parents' house, exhausted. My mom, my son Justin, and my brothers slept in my parents' bedroom to keep my grieving mother company. We all slept soundly, or so I thought. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, my younger brother sat at the table, looking worried. When we asked what was bothering him, he hesitated before saying, "I don't know if I should tell you, but I feel like I need to." The bed in my parents' room was large and white, designed by my father himself. At the foot of the bed was a heavy chest of drawers where my mum kept mementos, baby clothes, old love letters, dried flowers, and such. That night, my brother Ron woke up because he needed to use the bathroom. As he turned to face the bed, he saw my father sitting on the chest, looking sadly at my mother and my son, both peacefully asleep. What startled him was that my father was dressed in the same clothes we buried him in, but there were no legs, only an upper torso sitting on the chest. My brother was frozen in shock. Trying to wake my other brother, Ron made a loud noise, which caused the apparition to disappear. My mother cried when she heard this, wishing she could have seen my father one last time. Strangely, she never had any dreams or felt his presence, even after that. Since then, I've kept my eyes open, even in the shower. I've always been fascinated to hear that so many people have had supernatural or paranormal experiences. I'm definitely not the only one. To give some background, both sides of my family have always had strong intuition. We're not exactly psychic or mediums, but many of my relatives have their own stories, and growing up, I often heard them. As a child, I had a few experiences myself, but my parents brushed them off. They didn't want me to be scared by the idea of ghosts, so they told me, "You don't want to tell a kid ghosts are real, or they'll be scared all the time." That didn't exactly help me, considering I was terrified to sleep in my own room for years due to a strange presence I felt. It wasn't until I was older that I learned my mother had always believed in ghosts, and I still hold a bit of a grudge for not helping me understand what was going on in my childhood bedroom. She even admitted that the house sometimes felt strange. I can't help but feel frustrated about it. Here's a quick side note. I remember being really young, and one time, I didn't want to sit in Sunday school with the other kids. One of the teachers decided to take me back to the main worship hall instead. I was standing at the back, surrounded by people, and couldn't see my mom. I started to worry she wasn't there. Then she coughed, just the way she always did, and I was able to pinpoint exactly where she was. It was like an instinctive recognition of her sound. That's important later, but I've always been curious if anyone else can identify family members by the specific sounds they make, even subconsciously. But anyway, this story isn't about my mother or that house. It's about something that happened after my parents divorced when I was around 7. My dad bought a new house, and my brother and I moved in with him. The story starts with a dream my aunt had many years later. She dreamed that my grandpa appeared to her from a swirl of mist and told her, Take your brother Danny to the hospital. He doesn't want to go, but he has to. My aunt was so convinced that it was my grandpa that she immediately went over to her brother, my dad, and insisted he go to the doctor. My dad, stubborn as ever, didn't want to go to the hospital. He hated them. He believed hospitals made people sicker. But my aunt had the upper hand, being the baby of a large family, so she managed to push him into going. When my dad finally saw a doctor, they told him he was weeks away from a major heart attack. I wasn't surprised when I got the call that he was in the hospital. Upset, yes, but not surprised. My dad had never taken care of himself. Junk food, sugary drinks, no exercise. I even remember sitting with him in the car while my mother and brother went to a pediatrician's appointment. My dad wouldn't even step into the waiting room. The doctor's warning didn't change much at first. A week later, he was back in the hospital after having a heart attack. I had visited him for a month, and he was doing better. But just a week after I left, he had another heart attack and passed away while I was on my way to see him again. What happened next was strange. It was a Wednesday, a day my dad always came home from the hot dog joint down the street with a pile of hot dogs. He'd spend about $6, and my brother and I would always eat them together, sitting in the living room. We were still in the waiting for him to come home phase, not quite ready to accept that he was gone. That night, while we were eating our hot dogs, we heard footsteps. I knew my dad's footsteps like the back of my hand. He wore cowboy boots, and each step had a distinct two-note sound. I looked at my brother, and without saying a word, we both rushed to the screen door. We opened it, but there was no one there. The street was empty. We went back inside and ate in silence, but that moment stuck with me. A few days later, I was sitting in the living room at noon, just thinking about how my dad would be leaving the house around that time for his office. Out of nowhere, the front door popped open. It wasn't a slam, just a soft click of the latch. It opened just enough for us to notice. This happened every day around noon, and again around 6 p.m., the times my dad would typically come and go. I dreaded having to close that door, feeling like I was shutting him out. I haven't been back to that house in years, as I've had a falling out with my dad's side of the family. But the last time I spoke with my brother, who still lives there, he told me the door still pops open sometimes. My aunts have also mentioned feeling his presence from time to time. My name is Emma Martin, and I'm 13 years old. For the past 3 or 4 years, I've had experiences with people who are no longer alive. I did experience this when I was younger, but it stopped for a while, only to start again later. When I was born, my uncle Eugene died in a car crash. Sadly, he suffered severe injuries, including crushed ribs and lungs, and died from a lack of breath. I never met him, but around 2006, I started seeing him. Whenever I saw him, he was just standing there, smiling at me. One day, something different happened. I was sitting in the living room with my mom and dad, watching a movie, when I saw my uncle Eugene walk in. He sat on the couch next to my dad. My dad couldn't see him, but I could. Eugene turned and rubbed my dad's arm, and my dad was shocked because he could feel something rubbing him, though no one was there. I told my dad it was Eugene, but Eugene got mad at me for saying that. Later that night, he came into my room, not looking happy. I apologized, and when I did, he smiled. Since that day, my uncle Eugene has appeared to me from time to time, especially in certain situations. Sometimes, though, I don't see Eugene, I see shadows. Shadows of people I don't recognize. Some of these shadows are faint, but others are very clear, and they stand beside me. When I was about 8, I saw a small shadow that looked like a little boy. I didn't know of any little boys in my family who had passed away, and that made me scared. One time, I saw the little boy's shadow standing next to Eugene. Eugene seemed happy with the boy there, so I tried to feel happy too. From then on, I could always feel the boy's presence at night, sitting on my bed, staring at me. At first, I thought Eugene had sent him to take care of me when he couldn't, but things started to change. The little boy started appearing in my dreams, and sometimes he scared me for no reason. I felt like he was trying to warn me about something. A year later, my mom's brother Peter passed away. That's when I started to wonder if the little boy's warnings meant something. I never saw Peter's ghost until the anniversary of his death. On that day, I saw him standing behind my mom. He put his hand on her shoulder, and she started crying, telling my grandma that she could feel him. I went to her and said it was Peter, but she didn't believe me since I was so young. Then, Peter bent down to me and smiled. He almost kissed me, but then he saw his 2 younger sisters and went to stand by them. Since then, Peter has appeared to me several times, and he's always been there to help when I was sad or in trouble. In about 2011 or 2012, I started boxing. My dad and his brothers, including Eugene, used to box, and apparently it's something that runs in our blood. Every time I fought at a club, a coach would tell my dad that I had a special way of fighting. My dad was proud of me and always took pride in these compliments. One day, I was fighting in a big tournament, the Ulster tournament. Before every fight, I always prayed to my 2 uncles, Peter and Eugene. When I went into the ring, I could have sworn I heard Eugene's voice. But I didn't pay much attention to it. When the bell rang to start the first round, I froze in the ring. Suddenly, I saw Eugene standing in front of me, wearing boxing gloves. He winked at me and stood beside me. Every time my opponent went to hit me, Eugene would make a move, and I would copy him. I won the fight after 3 rounds, and I truly believe it was thanks to my uncle. In November or December of 2013, my mom took a video of my little brother and sister dancing. In the video, strange white things started flying around in front of the camera. Some were faint, but others were clear. As my brother and sister knelt down and pretended to play guitar, the door to the bathroom behind them started opening slowly. After about 6 seconds, the door began to close, but I noticed someone moving in the bathroom, even though the room was supposed to be empty. A week or 2 later, my brother sat in my dad's chair, facing a painting of my Uncle Eugene. He said to my mom, "Mummy, I miss Uncle Eugene. He was a very nice man. Will I ever see him again?" My brother never met Eugene, since Eugene passed before he was born. My mum was shocked and confused. A few minutes later, my brother burst into tears and said, "Mummy, I miss him. I'm going to cry." My mum was scared because she didn't understand how he knew about Eugene. Later, my brother started taking pictures with his iPod. One day, while my dad was reading the newspaper, my brother called him over and showed him a picture he had taken. It was a picture of a shadow, which my brother called a blue Peter, a shadow of a person. My dad was very scared because no one had ever told my brother about blue Peters. My dad showed the picture to my mom, and they were both freaked out. Recently, I've been struggling at school, and my Uncle Peter has been there for me. My mom told me to pray to him, and though I thought it was weird at first, I did it. Within a day, I felt him with me at school. One day at lunch, I saw both Peter and Eugene looking at a girl I had been having trouble with. They looked angry at her, and that's when I knew that praying to them worked. A few days ago, my brother said something strange to my cousin. He sat on her knee and pointed to a painting of my Uncle Eugene. He said, "That's my Uncle Eugene. He's my daddy's brother. Did you know he died in a car crash because he was drinking and hit another car?" My mom, dad, and I were all shocked because no one had told him how Eugene died. When my cousin asked him how he knew, he said, "The fairies from up above told me," pointing to the sky. We all realized he was talking about angels. That night, as we put my brother to bed, I sat with my dad at the dinner table. My dad was upset, saying how much he missed Eugene, and wished he could see him one more time. At that moment, Eugene appeared at the table, smiling at my dad and then at me. He seemed happy that my dad was talking about him. This is what's been happening in my life with my dead relatives. It feels like me and my brother are special, and we have a connection to those who have passed on.